Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rocket Lasso Live. I have a guest with me today. I've got Casey Hupke with me. How's it going, man?
Hey, it's going pretty damn good. Comparative to current events, I feel as though I'm doing okay.
That's good to hear. And actually, as a follow up, because I had mentioned it to some of the crowd the other day, we were supposed to do the stream on Friday, but then your dog ended up getting sick. I just wanted to double check on how they are doing. Is it a
He is a
he? Yeah.
giant. He's a giant borderline horse named Brutus who weighs a little over 100 pounds, and he had this like degenerative gum disease that was causing all kinds of like skin inflammation and infection issues on his whole body. And he's very difficult to take to the vet. Like I have to, hold him down in a normal situation, but under COVID conditions in Los Angeles, it's really difficult to get in. A window opened. It was literally like a phone call. Hey, there's a surgery window available, and the choice. I just there was no way to not choose dog health.
Yeah.
But doing well today. He looks very funny. He doesn't have any teeth in the front or on the bottom. It just starts with canines and then goes back. He has the equivalent of a dental mullet.
Well, it's good to hear that he is doing better. We've got a lot to cover today, but this is the first time you are a guest on the live stream. It was actually your idea last week when R23 dropped. You're like, hey, why don't we talk about nodes? I was like, that's a great idea. I've been spending a lot of time in them in the last couple of days, but I get kind of obsessed with building things from scratch, and there's a lot to learn with it. So I don't know how smooth any of this will be, but we do have some cool demo files to talk about. But before we go too far on that, why don't you talk a little bit about your background? If you've got something to pull up on the screen as far as your work, let me know if you are, so I can switch to your screen. And
Yeah.
yeah, let's hear a little bit about your background.
So yeah, my name's Casey Hupke. I've done you know dozen or so NAB SIGGRAPHs with the Maxon family. I've been a motion designer since about 2004, 2005. I've been a practicing designer and creative since I first acquired Photoshop to make punter and prog user interfaces for AOL 2.5. Um, yeah, I'm a tinkerer. I'm a technical director type person. Of late, I've been more in the director seat, in the creative director seat, and been freelance as sort of like a collective operation with these two other fellows in South Africa named Chris Cook and Rhino Epstein and Eckstein. Sorry. So I can show off our most recent reel, a bunch of collective work that we've done, helping out like other studios and direct to client stuff. But
Yeah, let's. I'll click to share the screen, and you go ahead and play that. I'm not sure if the audio will come through. I'll let you know.
okay.
Yeah, you're up on screen. No, I do not hear it, so feel free to talk over it.
Okay. Yeah. So this is, some of the work we've done. This was some Adidas stuff, some personal exploration stuff. Worked with a bunch of studios in like a couple in New York, a couple of, private startup companies, and just generally we sort of have a look that we always sort of end up using to pursue with. It started probably about 4 years ago with these fellas. I had some boards, and then I had also an entire full week of meetings. So I met Chris looking for a freelancer to sort of start up and get going. Like I just didn't have time. All I was doing was really lining up the next project, but missing out on the opportunity to work on them. So this sort of collective formed, and the three of us, and sometimes four or five of us, basically operate as like a mini remote studio that any other company can just kind of drop in their studio, which has worked out pretty great in recent events because a lot of companies struggled to onboard a whole bunch of remote artists. So discovering that there was a team of 3 to 4 people that already have a shorthanded entire pipeline with deadlines set up, and the ability to spin up EC2 instances, and had Redshift licensing and Houdini licenses and Cinema licenses all ready to go. It was pretty good. And then my personal site is at xkcx.com. You can check out there. It's more personal work and breakdowns of other projects and stuff that were created by a bunch of people, And then you can find me on Instagram at Darth Casey.
Yes, I've got links below the video to Casey stuff, so you should be able to find them down there. Yeah, thanks so much. I'm going to pull us back up on screen, And yeah, really cool work. I mean, you've been kind of specializing in a lot of like advanced particle work. I remember being pretty blown away with it's going back a little ways, but when you had like a fiery lava thing growing, where it's like translating from particles to vertex maps and pulling that data back in, and doing a lot of X particles work. There's always been a lot there, and I know that polyFX is like one of the main things that you have pushed to its limit in some pretty impressive ways as well, just
Yeah.
as a single effect.
Yeah, when I was doing that vertex map presentation, I don't even think I knew the construct of a wet map, but that's basically what I was doing. I was basically create before like vertex animations from fields were a thing. I was like,
Uh-oh, you seem to have frozen up a bit there. Let's see what happens. I still seem to be going, but I think I've lost you. Whoop, there you are moving again.
yeah, I can hear you. For
Okay,
some reason, right now in LA, we're having really bad internet connection, so there might be some random times where I lock up.
okay. Well, we'll just keep it going and give it generous time for you to pop back up again. Um, but yeah, yeah, you've definitely pushed some of the things in cinema to some pretty extreme like dimensions that I didn't know was possible. So it's really cool seeing your work and how far you push it. And I'm really curious on what your opinions are going to be here on nodes. How much time have you spent in nodes in R23 so far?
Well, so they kind of came up as like a surprise. Like I heard about some version of it, like usually at NAB or something like that, like a year ago or 2 years ago. Some I didn't know what they were, or if they were or nodes or anything. Just various Maxon folks that love to tease me would go like, "I think you're going to be really excited about an upcoming version." And I was like, "What does that mean? New espresso? Are we getting espresso too?"
Yeah,
And
super espresso too.
yeah, it really is. And I
Oh,
think
speaking of
it's
which, I think Burned is here in the chat, keeping an eye. So, and I think Rick said he was going to be keeping an eye on us for the first hour at least. So if we start messing something up, we keep an eye out on the chat where he's like, "No, don't do that. No, do this node."
oh great. That's wonderful. Yeah, so I haven't built anything with it or animated or made any jobs or anything with it. I have no real advanced user knowledge of it, but I have been nodally, um, immersed in the past 5 years or whatever. Or whenever like Houdini Indie became a thing, I started getting into Houdini, and it sort of like translated my espresso knowledge into that pretty easily. And then I started learning Substance Designer, and then I moved out of After Effects into Fusion. So progressively, nodes had becoming more and more of a thing. I feel like scene nodes, the language to me feels almost like taking, I don't know, a C language and then turning those functions into nodes, because like the naming and the constructs and the vernacular just don't I don't have anything as a touchstone. A lot of the things like I think is supposed to be one thing, and then it's something different because it's named something in C40 core differently, like matrix operator versus matrix object. You think they're going to have
Yes.
parallels, but they couldn't be more different.
Yeah. Well, also just the basic fact, I'm curious how much people are going to trip over it. I've been kind of in my head, like plenty of people use espresso, but not like what percentage of people are like fluent in any way in espresso. And I don't think it's going to be that large of a number. And this is significantly more powerful, but also complex than espresso ever was. So I'm curious, like how this ends up shaking out eventually. Before we get into it, it's super important to note, and as you were saying, you haven't used any jobs yet. The official word from Maxon is this is like a tech demo. This is not production ready. So they are not recommending that it's like, oh, let's build our pipeline around it. It's entirely possible that when the next version of Cinema comes out, that they've changed the core functionality of nodes, and things you built with nodes could break, because this is a hey, let's get it out there, let's get some feedback, let's see how users like it or use it and what they'd like to see. And that is the context in which we should talk about it. In addition to that, something that Espresso does, or something that you get in Espresso often, is if you connect bad nodes, they'll turn yellow. It's like, oh, it's broken, you shouldn't do that. But in C nodes, it won't do that. It'll be like, okay, you want to times like 10,000 vertexes with 10,000 normals? Okay, they're all going to multiply. And, you might, I don't know how long you'd be waiting for that to refresh. So there's a lot of new, I'll say quirks. It's just like the new workflow. And we don't know it yet. So don't be surprised if I end up having to force quit a few times because I multiply something by something else I shouldn't have, and things along those lines. But I don't know. Do you have anything else to cover before we start just jumping in and looking at some files?
Yeah, that's basically it. Like the files that I have, I bugged Rick for this morning and got from a couple other Maxon folks. So none of these. I didn't make any of these assets. These are all operators that have been compiled already that I've just been sort of hacking through, which is effectively how I learn anything. I
Yep.
you know I open up the documentation and find a reference file and break it and then fix it and then ask it to do something it didn't want to do in the first place. And then I figured it out after a few hours.
Yep, that's exactly like that's the reverse engineering way. I love getting files, just tweak you tweak values until you're like, okay, I get what it does. Now let me add something, let me subtract something, and then you find that box, and I was like, okay, now I know a new node and a workflow. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you got a couple of cool files. So let's start by jumping to your screen. So you are steering, and go ahead and pop it. In fact, why don't you even explain like the basics of the interface?
Okay, cool. I'll let me revert to the startup layout. Layouts. I'm just going to go back to startup. So when you open up a fresh scene that has scene nodes in it, this is the forest example that was in one of their earlier presentations and has probably been shown off before. I think it's a really good one to look at because it shows sort of similar structures to how you would do clones on clones and objects and iterating objects and all that. But you notice that you have nothing in the object manager. You have nothing really anywhere else because it's in a hidden context called scene nodes. So if you go to Window and open up Scene Node Editor, this was interesting. It didn't have the highlighting, and it most certainly is new in 23. I didn't sleep on this and miss it in 22. It's definitely new, so this should be object highlighting. So you open that up, and then so you're going to notice a couple things really quick. The attribute manager that you have here, that's where all your access is going to be. So when making a layout for scene nodes, I basically just replaced the material tab, raise this up a little bit, and give myself some extra room. And I'm just going to go ahead and save this layout. Save layout as. Because I'm going to crash Cinema at some point during this, and I don't want to have to remake the UI.
Yeah. They also have a pre-built layout for the node layout that builds it differently than you, but effectively the similar thing.
Oh, I didn't see that get added. Whoa, this is way different. Change is bad.
Okay, well, it's almost like, all Cinema's crammed into the right side, and then the left is all the nodes. So I thought this is a pretty good layout. I've actually been using this pretty much out of the gate. And they even have things like the console there to print out
the console's
text.
Here.
Yep.
But where would I put the render view for like Redshift or Octane
on the
or
second
Arnold
monitor?
On a set? No, I'm like, if I can't do it on one monitor, then because my second monitor needs to be like all Slack and Discord just to make sure that I'm not needed in the middle of a conversation. No one asked me to join.
No, I'm with you. Especially recording tutorials and live streams, I keep everything on one monitor as well. But I mean, typically I just dock the renderers behind the viewport if there's limited screen space. But I mean, this is another huge interface that we have to like fill up the screen with.
Yeah. So one thing that I think that they did perfect out the gate was give us a commander in this construct context. Like, didn't have to ask for it. Didn't have to beg for it. We had commander built automatically in with C. So this asset is, I think, effectively like the use case for what my entire career was from 2004 to 2009 even. I just built a whole bunch of espresso rigs that were honestly a ton more complicated than what's inside this because of the nature of espresso. And I had never provided a user interface that was anywhere near as simplified as, making 333 trees by adding that in there and then changing the random seed and, having polygon sample levels and, all those qualities set up. I think this is something that this asset creation is something that I feel like the Cinema 4D community has needed for a long time. Because this is the way that I'm hoping foresight. I have no inside knowledge on this, but this is the thing that I hope replaces the random $2 plugin that makes your file impossible to send to like PixelPlow or any other third-party render farm because they don't have Karen Tomlery's fix that one issue you had with splines plugin for Cinema 4D R21. and being able to procedurally modify and edit and create effectively plugins or assets that are shareable, this means they can go on a farm. That is just not in the event that like they change scene nodes entirely in 24 or 25 and you basically have to effectively recompile your nodes. But otherwise, like, this is a great way to build an object. So this started out in this level like this. In some context, someone built this out, sketched it out, put this to their output, which renders to the viewport, and then decided to select all and group and then create the inputs that are up here, which is effectively like creating user data inputs for Espresso. So that's the straight parallel there. It's very much like Espresso in the context that you promote things up. It's just the context looks different. There's no, in the object manager, which is right here, I'm going to put a cube in the object manager just so you can see that there are two things that live in the same world. And I'm going to turn everything back on in here, or try to. Filter all, filter geometry. There you go. So I want my handles. So here's the two worlds living together. Scene nodes are obviously something different than what's happening in this object manager, but it's interesting. I just think that the whole context is smart, and this really isn't that big. Like once you start figuring your way out with the help of Rick, if you have access to Rick and you want to know how something works, you just hop in there. Or Noseman. I see Noseman in chat. He has a ton of knowledge.
Yes, period. I've learned a lot from him, and I have had several conversations. Now go inside that tree folder because there's another tree group. I wonder how much is going on inside there. Yeah, so here's where the magic is happening. Yeah,
this is making the actual tree object. And we don't need to go through and dig through, but I think that the UX that's been created and released with this thus far is, I think Maxon wants your feedback. I have certain issues with certain aspects of it. Like there's just quality of life things that would be nice. Like when the lines get all mushed up like this, it sort of drives me into an OCD like panic state. And like I'm always kind of like trying to like figure out how to get these to line up or overlap in a way that works.
Oh, yes.
It's just never going to happen, and I'm just going to have to let it go. But I like the way you can annotate things, and I like the way everything cleanly works. I wish there was a way to quickly navigate up or backwards.
There might be a shortcut, but I don't know. Well, do that again so people can see.
So here's the asset that has been created. I can't remember exactly who the name of the person was that created this. I'm sorry, but it's someone from Maxon. Hop inside. Once we're inside, this is basically iterating off our tree asset. This is our tree asset. And you can, I keep trying to hit like an up button, but yeah.
Is there a different application that goes up that you're reflexing to?
In Houdini, when you hit U, you go up a level. So if you dive into all the different nodes, you just go U, and you'll just kind of all the way rise back to the surface level. But there has to be an action for this.
But yeah, up there you could see that it kind of says scene nodes, and then he dives inside this forest, and you have scene nodes forest, and then you go inside the tree, and now you're inside of the forest in the tree. So that's how you can kind of zoom back out a level. Just clicking on the text for now. Maybe there's a shortcut, and maybe we can assign a shortcut. But
we have a file path. One thing that I haven't tried to do is access or reference things within, like at a higher level. Like I haven't figured out that yet, but I know that it's probably there. Okay, so this one, I think it's a really good example of just like what the viewport is sort of capable with these trees. Again, I'm going to throw in some random numbers here. I haven't tested to see which ones are going to work and which ones are going to crash.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty big number to just toss in there. But complexity could be...
Hey, I did it.
Oh, wow. Those are dangerous numbers because you never know what number is going to behave like a subdivision surface where every time you increase by 1, you're actually doing a ×4 multiplier on complexity. So it becomes orders of magnitude with each increase of a single integer.
Yeah, there could be a subdivision operation inside there that I just didn't know existed.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you just told it to subdivide 22 times. It's like, oh, nope. I have found that if it starts doing a really kind of rough calculation, if you hit escape a couple times, it's like, oh, stop the calculation. Like
yeah, I'm
you want to
spamming
interrupt it.
escape right now.
Um, so that kind of thing can get interesting. But why don't do you have anything that we do you know anything or well enough that we can try and build something from scratch on your screen? Because I could start building something from scratch and maybe talking people through some very basics before we open up some other more advanced files to show them.
Yeah, let me show off this one. Rick sent me this, and I started playing around with it, and I thought it was very very cool. So let me show a couple ways to interact with this dual mesh asset that Rick, I believe Rick created it. Someone else may have made it themselves, but this is a very fancy motion design construct called dual meshing. We're taking a and also, I love the Magic Bullet looks filters inside the viewport. I don't know if everyone can see those on the stream as well, but we got glow and glint. We have a vignette going on in this one. But this dual mesh operator is really cool. So we're taking a legacy object importer and passing it this body of the elephant. I can take anything. Let me just grab a sphere really quick and go in here, drop the sphere in there, and then in the sphere, I can translate it. I'll need to have it update, but it's really cool. I just like the way that you're creating an asset out of this whole context. This is in a connect object right now because like everything in C4D, usually when you're working with MoGraph for animations and doing other things with it, you need to put it in a connect object. It's just the straight up easy way to do it, or easy way to fix it. So let me just grab this legacy object. This legacy object import is basically feeding the geometry into this dual mesh system, which is taking, triangulating, creating like an atom array type object, subdividing it, and then whipping it into this cool poly Voronoi cage. But just to show adding with MoGraph, if you had a MoGraph animation in your scene, for example, let me just put this back to the body so I can move just to show. So I have this elephant. I have this connect object, MoGraph, cloner object with a random effector with noise animated. And, so it's animating. I have all the viewport things turned on, so my system may be moving a little slow right now. But it's animating, and the dual mesh is calculating. But I can legacy object import an object from my object manager, and now have MoGraph animated objects with this cool dual mesh thing on them. This was just an example of taking a new asset that's being built and applying it to an existing scene that you may already be experiencing inside cinema. But
Yep.
If I take this over here, this is basically a quick and dirty MoGraph cloner object set up using scene nodes. It's just some randomly offset planes or spheres using a random field and a plane effector. But I can just as easily shift this geometry into our... Oh, wait. I wanted to go in
Yeah,
here.
I think into the geometry operation.
Into the geometry operation. Oh, I just had this, though. I just set it up. Get my geometry into the geometry operator. Get the op output into the op input. That should update. No?
Well, you need to. It's not outputting these nodes. You change what's being fed to the scene.
Right. There we go. The scene node. So there we go. Plugged into the scene nodes version. So just it's neat that you can do both methodologies. Like you can build a whole animation using both types of flows. I was really enjoying playing with that this morning and sort of figuring out how to get that setup going. And this one, the operator group, was a bunch of geometry operations that I'm going to spend a lot of time kind of learning, because this sort of geometric procedural modeling and these sort of operators existing on like a parametric or a polygonal level, these are types of things that I've wanted to have inside of Cinema for the longest time because I always hated like having 6 or 7 different versions of an edited piece of geometry that I was using to animate something with. Um, there's one more. Oh, this example is something that I love. It's this asset was also created when Python first came to Cinema. I can't remember who made this. I think it was someone named Tylo. But they this binary kite. If you look up Cinema 4D Python binary kite, back in 2011, I first saw this asset, and it made me want to learn Python so bad. And then I started learning Python, and I never wanted to learn Python ever again. So I'm glad that in 2020, this binary kite finally came back into my life in a way that I find vastly more readable than Python. And I can't wait to, you know, build assets like this because this is the exact kind of stuff that I am just like completely blown away with, like the level of performance, like how many cubes are in this scene right now. Like if you tried this with just a regular cloner object, you never not going to happen. It's just that's impossible. So this was something that I saw that just got me like insanely curious because there's not a lot of boilerplate stuff that you need like in like there's no hidden, not that I've seen, there may be that I haven't seen. There's no hidden like 42 line of code node in here. Like these nodes are outputting to this viewport. Nothing in here is hiding 65 lines of code with a library include that make all the binary math translations effective. This is how I like to program. I don't want to write.
Yeah, well, even me, and I mean, I do code stuff, and I do a lot of Espresso, and even every time I had to make a Python node in Espresso, I always felt like I was cheating. It's like, no, that's not pure Espresso anymore. Like, this is cheating. Because now I can't say, look what I made in Espresso. I have to say, well, this is some code. So there's definitely that wall. And right now, there literally is not a code node. So yeah, there is no magic hidden code in there.
It's like in the joke that everyone who uses Houdini or learns Houdini, they always joke that the next version of Houdini, all the nodes are going to be gone, and there's only going to be a wrangle node. Because there's so many times you see someone set up in their layout, and it's like, oh, this looks great. Let me see how they're doing it. And you hit that wall of like 4 code nodes in a row, and you're like, oh, they're capable of programming. Of course, that's why this looks amazing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Even just from you shouldn't be scared of code. Like, code is great and you can do super powerful things, but there is kind of a purity to staying inside of a single system. Speaking of systems, something we haven't emphasized that is pretty important is that currently the way scene nodes are implemented, everything kind of only flows one way. Casey already showed that you use the legacy node, and it is the only way of bringing an object into the scene nodes. And then the scene nodes don't exist in the object manager. They cannot be interacted with. You couldn't take the elephant and generate all that crazy cool geometry and then clone that end result with a Cinema 4D cloner. You'd have to stay within the node context. And in the node context, we can render out to the built-in renderers. And I think it's already implemented into Redshift. The other renderers have the ability to do it, but they are going to have to implement the ability for it to render in their different softwares.
That's a very good point because it's a technology preview.
Yes, exactly. So
okay, I'm now I want to troll you while you work on something.
Yes, that's great. Let me hopefully.
I can't wait to see what you've been coming up with.
Let's see my screen. Let's see if it swaps. Okay, you're hanging out on screen, but I've got my monitor up now. And we can start tinkering here. And actually, I would like to walk people through it just a little bit and kind of go step by step with some very basic nodes and maybe show off like that elephant example you showed. We can make something similar to that, but we'll do a simple version. So here's a thought is I like starting out with a sphere. So instead of bringing in the information from the object manager, we can search for different assets. In fact, we've got all these different lists of all of the different nodes, and let me just show everybody how many there are. So you can see we've got 2D, array, then color, we got bunch, context, conversion, distribution. So you see there are a lot of nodes, especially under generator and geometry. There's a bunch of nodes. So this is essentially everything that we have to play with right now. So inside of here, we could just search for the word sphere, and there is two different ways of bringing in a sphere. Currently, I'm just going to generate a sphere geometry, and it's got its own properties, which are very similar to what we're used to in cinema. I can change that to an icosahedron, but you won't see it in the viewport because currently this isn't outputting it anyway, and it's only the geometry. So I could search for a geometry operation. So I'll search for geo at the bottom. There's a geometry operation, geometry op. So that can be fed geometry. That kind of makes it real in a way. And here it's just like theoretical geometry. Here's output geometry. That operation can output the scene, and now we do have a sphere. I can hit NB. You can still see the way it's been built by polygons. We can change any settings that we want inside here, changing the radius and whatnot. So pretty straightforward there. That generates the geometry. But we can start making changes to it immediately. The simplest thing I really like is we can do an extrude. So searching for extrude, grab, I want the geometry of the sphere. I'm going to now do some sort of extrude to it, and then that will output into the rest of the world, and that you can now see every single polygon being extruded. Let me change my display so I don't see the grid. So yeah, now that is all getting extruded. Now that is everything getting extruded. Selecting the extrude, we have very similar properties that we're used to with extrude. We can offset, we could randomly change how they are being offset. We can change subdivisions. There's a lot of different layers on it. Now, something that's pretty cool is there's different selections, and selections are really important. And honestly, there's still something I'm wrapping my head around. But one I like is they're searching for the word selection. There is a random selection, and random selection actually is an asset. We haven't talked about the concept of assets, but Casey had shown how things could be grouped and you could go inside the group, but you can also kind of package something up and treat it as an asset. And this is actually an asset. I'd love if there was some indicator that it's an asset. Technically down here, you can see that it says asset there, but I'd love if there's like an icon or something, maybe a different color. But clicking on assets, you can see I could click on edit asset, and now I actually do go inside this as a standalone node, and we can see kind of all the magic that's happening inside there. So there's a lot happening, but essentially all that's doing is saying, hey, feed in some geometry, and I will now output for you a random selection. So now this has split up our geometry into a geometry and a selection. So that selection can be fed into the extrudes selection, and now only random polygons are being selected and extruded. So having done that, we get selected. There's the chance, so I could increase or decrease that, change the random seed, get different seeds on there. And my favorite setting in here is in the extrude, we could turn on use islands, and now they group. So if these are extruded or offset just a little bit, you can see that the individual groups will stay grouped. So that's individually applying to all of them. But let's not randomly select. Let's kind of apply on everything. So
if you edit the asset, is that like a node equivalent to saving as default?
I don't know if I bet you if we probably cannot override that asset, but we could probably save it as a new asset. But I'm not entirely sure. It's just something I know we could do. I haven't done it yet.
Okay. I was like, oh man, that would like hopefully it's creating a new asset called like random selection.1 or something. Because if that's because I've hopped on people's computers trying to help them out and dropped in like an object and they saved their default sphere or whatever, let's say, with a size of like 3.1 in Y and 1 and 1 in X and Z. And it's like, why did you do this? And it's like, oh, it's just the way I like my default spheres.
Yeah. Yeah, here's a grass generator, and inside here is probably a lot going on. But create, add nodes. Let's see, asset. Yeah, save as new version or save as new asset. So yeah, it seems like there's some sort of versioning or asset. And as soon as you create these and you save them, I think they start appearing in maybe the generator list. Maybe there's a way of saying where they belong. But like I said, I haven't zoomed out to that level yet. Everything's very like right there in the core node system for me so far. But there's a lot of things we do here just with basic modeling commands. And in fact, when they were working on the scene nodes, I think they're spending a lot of time on the MoGraph functionality, and all this modeling functionality only kind of snuck through last second. They're like, oh, we can ship it with these. So that's pretty neat. The equivalent of an inner extrude now is called inset. So if I grab an inset, feed it all of the geometry, and then output all of the geometry, I'm getting an inner extrude, which is way too big. So set that down to 1. And now you can see I get this inner extrude. Now, conceptually, here's something I've been trying to wrap my mind around is while we're working, if I go into polygon mode, we can actually see what is selected. And you'll see nothing is selected. Now, in Cinema, if you have everything selected and you do like an extrude, everything extrudes. If you have nothing selected and you do an extrude, everything extrudes. Only if you have a partial selection does it apply to that partial one. And that same thing applies here. So what that means is if let's say I want to do an inner extrude like I'm doing here, this inset, and then I want to delete all these inside polygons. Let me go ahead and search for the word delete. And here is a geometry delete. So I'll grab that. I can actually drop it on this line and it'll interject itself as long as it's a valid node. And now you see it's just saying delete and it's on polygon mode. And I haven't given the selection, so you think it would apply to everything, but it's not going to. So what I actually need to do in this case is take my sphere and I want to set an active selection. So I want to kind of say, hey, this is what I want to select. So taking the geometry and saying that is the geometry. What do I want to select? Well, I'm going to search for the word select. And there's something called selection range. And the selection range, I could feed it a geometry. And inside there, by default, there's a checkbox that says select all. So I'm going to say I want to select all polygons out of the gate. And now it's outputting a list of polygons. So if I feed that in as the indices, then this active selection should now be selecting everything. So I can now show you that by feeding that into the inset. And you see instantly it did apply. But let me go step by step here. I'm going to temporarily get rid of that delete. And before, when I was selecting these, you saw nothing was selected. But now when I select the inset, you can actually see that they were selected. So since I said select everything, do an inner extrude, then only the polygons that got inset are the ones selected, which means now that is the active selection. So when that gets fed into the delete, that can now be output as the final geometry, and those have gotten deleted. So you kind of have to keep track of both what is happening and what is it happening to. So now that that has been inset and it's now been deleted, we could do additional things like subdivide. So I'll search for subdivide. And here's a geometry subdivide. And also, if you don't know, I kind of have nodes I reach for now. But if I go into geometry, then you can just search through here and be like, what can I do? It's like, oh, I can extrude a line. I can delete things. So in this case, I know I want to subdivide. So I'll grab a subdivide.
And don't forget the commander. The commander is the, I mean, I know it's not the very beginner friendly, but once you get used to once you begin to love the commander, it's just like having Google inside your node graph.
Yes, that's very true. I was kicking myself because for the longest time, I didn't do the Alt or Shift workflow when creating new objects in general cinema. So you can automatically create a parent or a child. And after I finally started doing it, I was like, oh, why was I not doing this forever ago? But in any case, here's a subdivide. I'm subdividing my one. I could say I want it to be a smooth subdivision. So now you can see it's actually like a regular subdivision surface where it's getting rounded. And I can hit NA. Maybe, yeah, I gotta go to flat mode. So I can see how this is getting subdivided. I could subdivide it more than once, and I can see that's getting nice and rounded. And this is just based on that sphere. So it's like what you're talking about, that we can start interjecting whatever we want in any step. So after we delete something, maybe that's where we want to extrude. So let's search for an extrude. I gotta get used to the commander. C, extrude, and I can search here as well. So just hit the letter C, type in a couple letters from extrude. There's my new extrude. I want to take everything after the delete and then extrude it. And then let's just output that straight to the final. And I can see this is what is being extruded. But if I turn on use islands, then they all get grouped again. I don't want to extrude too far. Let's just do 5. And they're kind of empty right now. But I can seal this off by turning on create caps, all the kind of functions we're used to. So that seals that off. That all becomes one mesh. And that can be what gets fed into the subdivision. And then that gets fed into the final geometry. And now something with volume is being extruded and then smoothed out. And now we end up with this new geometry. So there's a lot. I mean, it's just the very basic beginnings of being able to do this. But it's essentially kind of like a parametric workflow. We can feed whatever geometry we want inside and get this as a result. And we can hit the branching point at any point. I could go back to when we inset and then branch off from there and then do something different and then recombine them at the end. And that's
with
where
child
things start
nodes.
getting nuts. Yeah, child nodes. And there's child nodes, and there's also something called connect. So you can use, it's actually, the Connect is very similar to the Cinema Connect. So this will blend the geometry and make it into one mesh. And then there's the child operation where you can actually give things a parent-child relationship. So different
So
ways
if
of
you
doing.
if you wanted to scale down the sphere, for example, that was the base sphere, and have it inside, you would drag from the base source sphere, put a matrix operator down to translate it, or scale it down a little bit, and then child merge them together. And then you could. I really like this workflow because, again, if you were starting to build this out in the legacy object manager, you'd probably have like 5 or 6 versions of the sphere in various levels of subdivision, in nulls with radios on red, because you're still working and iterating. And I think that nodes, complicated as they are, do lead you into a path of non-destructive creative freedom that I do not believe the legacy object manager gave you as much of a comfort level with. But in Cinema, it was very easy and forgiving to like group everything in a null, turn it off, copy paste, start over, do a new version.
Yes. No, I totally agree. And it just goes to, I mean, what always goes to my head, and it's why they originally first implemented their nodes with just the material stuff. And that's going back a version or two. And I haven't gotten into it yet, but I just found out that if you use the material nodes with Redshift, everything will actually show up in the viewport accurately, and it won't all be black. So it's like, oh, there's a super good reason to learn to do the nodes in Redshift.
They just need to implement user data, because without user data, it's a completely defunct system. Like without custom user data being involved in the material system, it becomes like such a basic level material set. User data is just so powerful, and once they can get those into the new nodes, then I'm on board. But until then, like I'm just completely not.
No, completely not something. He'll probably catch back up in a second. All right, we'll give him a second. So yeah, you can see how these are layered up. And while it's going, let's see if we can actually implement. Oh, he's back.
I'm sorry about my internet.
It's all good.
Oh, no, I'm saying it's hard to learn the new nodes when every engine is so reliant on that user data input being able to like switch between materials or offset materials or make things more varied and interesting.
Yes, totally agreed. Just for fun, let's do what Casey had just described and how we can link these. Anyway, to finish my point with the material stuff, the way I always saw it is I was always obsessed with using all the noise shaders, and I try and make everything with the noise shaders because, once again, going back to your render farm point, if you want to send something to a render farm, every time you have to gather giant materials, and every time you make a new folder, a new copy, you got to gather everything together. If you made it all with noises, then it's all just included. But if you made one noise, you would want it in, say, like the displacement and in the color channel, and copied 3 different times to be used in 3 different ways. But you have to copy it and paste it. So if you tweak one setting, you have to go all the way back and change each one. But now it could all be linked to the same original node. But let's execute on what Casey was just talking about, and we could take the original geometry and do something different with it. So in this case, I haven't done this so much. Actually, scaling with a matrix is something I haven't done, but
matrix
this is, yeah. But I don't know that we can do that with a single object interior, but we'll give it a try. So yeah, if you want to do position, scale, and rotation, you have to use matrices now, or at least they're called a matrix. If I were to feed this into, actually, yeah, even that can't be fed into this because it's not geometry. So that's where I don't know that this would be the way to go about scaling this. Yeah, that's actually a dangerous path to go for scaling that way. I would be doing more geometry stuff. I'm trying to think of a better example that I would be more familiar with.
Oh, I assume that there was like a handle that you could input the matrix op into from one of those.
I think this would be more about like transforming the vectors or the scale of the individual objects, because the matrix operation is kind of like a one-shot type thing. It's like, just like this became actual geometry, this will give it dimension. So we can use it one time, kind of here at the end, but I don't think we could use it there in the beginning quite that way.
Yeah, there needs to just be like a regular transform, like a thing that you put in between blank and blank that has like position, scale, and rotation in it.
Right. Well, actually, let me show you what might be a way of doing that, which is going to be a little bit fancy. And I could be completely wrong here, but let's search for a new geometry op just so I can drag this in. We can output the straight up sphere and then output that. So we want to keep the same original sphere, but modify it somehow. Now, I'm not sure that I'm using the correct nodes as I do this, but we can use a info, and I'm going to do a point info, so that I'm going to get all of the information from the geometry. And that is now outputting a list of all the normals and all the point positions. So now that I'm getting all the point positions, I could do something like scale them all down. So if I search for a scale node, then scale should be able to take a vector. So I'm going to feed it a vector, and said vector will be a list of points. And I want to scale it to what? Well, I want to scale it to 0.5. So now that is scaling that out. So what I've actually done is take positions and multiplied them by a number. So now I've done that, I can go to set.
I like this.
Yeah, point set. So now I'm going to set the point. So what geometry am I working with? Well, I'm working with the sphere's geometry, but I've changed where the points live. So I'll take the result of doing that math, feed it to this new point set, and let's feed that out as the geometry. And see if I can get that in there properly. There we go. And it actually worked. So I've now scaled the points so that is smaller. So now I have one sphere and a second sphere. So if I were to, let's do a connect actually. I'll search, hit C, type in connect. And I can grab a connect, drag this out. I want to, here's all these different geometries. I want to connect the geometry from this point set, and that'll be one geometry. And I want to grab the original geometry as a second geometry, take all of that and now plug that into my original kind of selection, inset, delete, extrude, subdivide, then output that end result. With any luck, we have combined, let's see. Oh, I need to feed that in here. There we go. I needed to select all of the new points, not the old points. So now that I've done that, you can see that I've got a second sphere on the inside, and all of this is referencing that singular same sphere. So if I were to decrease our count, both of them will decrease. If I were to increase my radius, both of them will increase. And yeah, just by changing the scale to, let's do like a 0.9, so it's barely scaling down. Now you can see I've got a second one right there on the inside.
Ooh, so then if you want to translate it, Noseman says to just put a matrix after the GeoOp, which would probably be easier because then you have all matrices that you can adjust in one go.
Yeah, well, I guess it more goes to, actually, no, that's true. Yeah, I always forget. Once you see we have fed the subdivide, our end result into a geometry, but from that point, I could extract the geometry back out again from it. And that's where I think we could do the matrix. So yeah, that would have been easier, but now you see how I've done it by actually iterating through the points. But yeah, we could totally do that with a matrix now that I think about it. Thanks, Noseman.
Can you rotate that point info though? Is there a rotation on there?
I haven't done it, but there are like matrix. Yeah, there's like rotate vectors, and I've literally not done it.
Okay.
But yeah, well, actually, yeah. So here's an angle, here's a vector, here's a pivot. So this is probably a point in space that we're going to pivot around. There's the list of vectors we're feeding in, and then the other two would be the angle we want to bend it. Seems like a dangerous thing to do. I should probably save this scene file. So I'll jump this into.
Look at all those files.
Oh yeah, these have been my tests as I go through.
I love the name. Why does this do this? Why does this not work? One or the other. I have files that are named the exact same way, but they don't make any sense to me in 2 years' time. Where I'll be like, what was I troubling here? This file doesn't even work anymore.
I do try. Let's just say double sphere.
Yeah, the matrix operator would probably be just like the most like. So if you just duplicated your GeoOp and then added a matrix operator after it.
Yes,
then at the end, connected them with a child object, you would end up with effectively the same thing, but you would have PSR scale. But the point info seems to be cool because that way you could actually animate that inner sphere to like rotate around in an animated offset, so it looked like it was rotating like inside of the sphere.
Yep. Well, let's try it super quick because it shouldn't take too long. So now I'm feeding this into a. Actually, I guess you cannot. Yeah, you can't feed. I don't think we feed geometry straight into a matrix, but if we feed it into the geometry operation, we can now output that operation into this operation, modify it in some way. And the way I would like to modify it is to, do we do the scale here? I think we should, you can't just type the numbers in here. to my
You can
recollection.
scale there.
Let me try. So now we're just seeing this final output of geometry, and if I say scale 2, okay, it does work there.
Yeah,
Cool. I
no, it
wasn't sure
works.
it would. I thought we had to build the matrix information, but it does work here. So I could say once again 0.8, 0.8, 0.8. So now those have all scaled down, but we still have that original one as well. So if from this matrix I say, hey, I just want the end resulting geometry, and that is now replacing everything that we had here. So that's now just turned into that matrix operation. So if we output that final one again, hopefully we end up with something pretty visually similar. Seemingly not. I might have done something wrong there, but
It's skipping a subdivide, I think.
well, no, I just don't
No.
even see the two. And then see, both of them are being fed through. So we have one bit of geometry, a second bit of geometry. They're both getting connected.
Did
So
you
I'm
scale the
physically
matrix
turning
yet?
them into one. Yeah, it should be 0.8.
Maybe you need more. Oh, you're only seeing one? How? No, there should be.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't seem quite right. But yeah, that's where it goes to. I'm not certain here.
Oh,
And
there's no geometry op in the second connect part. You're just putting
no,
it.
it all gets fed through eventually to this one.
No, go back. Like, see, you have your sphere going out to your geo to your matrix, but you have no geo operation for that going into the second geometry port, right?
We could, yes, but I didn't think that was relevant because we're just extracting the geometry. Yeah, see, I've added the second one in. So because I'm ultimately just extracting geometry from it, it's almost as if we're going geometry was my thought. I'm sure we're missing something basic here, but that's why I'm being careful with the things I tackle, because I haven't tried modifying things this way. I've been mostly staying in the world of manipulating points. But yeah, that's just something to tinker with. And let me see if I've got any good files to pop open. I've done a couple of...
Oh man, it'd be cool then to run a random selection over your faces and do some more extrudes with animation. You can have like a whole roiling, bubbling looking, like, you know, Buckmaster Fuller, like alien ball, just like undulating, and have an infinite recurrence of them with that method. Man, this opens up like so many doors. I'm so excited, like on a lot of fronts, to be excited about like building assets in cinema, like core. Like I've always been like excited about the third party stuff, and I've always been excited about what Insidium's done. But like, you know, frankly, I haven't been like, oh, I can't wait to play with cinema in some time. And this has me like super excited for like all the future releases.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I do feel like it's gonna be tricky creating like training for this and teaching it. And it's been tricky learning it because there's a lot of combinations that don't quite work. And some of this could just be like, okay, it's the first pass and it's going to improve as we give Max on feedback. A lot of it ends up being, even like I'm going to search for the word grid. It's like, okay, we want to do a cloner grid. It's like, okay, search for the word grid. It's like, well, do I want a distribution grid? Do I want a generator grid? Do I want a distribution operation grid?
Operation.
Yeah. And it just goes, but there's different reasons to use these different ones in different scenarios. And it's very easy to grab the wrong one for the wrong scenario.
Yeah. This would be cool to then run, like to weave in your wireframe that you just made in the last one, because that's pretty much what I was just talking about, building on top of it.
Yeah,
like
we have to be careful because this one has a lot of geo, but
still in wildly impressive performance. I think that's one of the things that like is getting me the most excited, is like all of the difficulties that I had with the complicated setups that I'd build, is eventually you get to the point where the application just says like, I cannot do this. Like, stop asking me to do this, Casey. I will not do it. But this system is saying, go ahead, Casey, do it. Your system will break.
Yeah. I'm with you on one level. I mean, well, first of all, I'm super excited, but it's important for people to know that nodes don't solve all problems. And it adds a lot of complexity because essentially with nodes, you don't get anything for free. You know, in cinema, if you make a displacer deformer and you put inside a sphere, you can just put in whatever noise you want and say, okay, here's the noise. And then you can set the scale and say, I want to travel upward. I want to travel downward. You don't get that for free here. So I essentially here, all I did was remake a displacer. But what I'm having to do here is like I have to import the time as a node, and then I have to get the point information and then extract the normals to get a direction from that. But then if I wanted to travel, I actually have to take every single vector and then offset it in space, which is happening somewhere here. Oh, here. I'm taking time, multiplying time by some amount, turning it into a three-dimensional vector. So I get X, Y, and Z. That is now grabbing all of my raw point positions and traveling them downward in space so that every point is getting sampled by a different point of noise. And that gets fed in as the raw thing to get sampled. And then I take those values out and start multiplying it. This is like how much it's extruding outward. And like the point being is in cinema, I could just be like displace deformer, noise, animation, done. Here,
right,
we have to say, no, we don't have the information. We have to get it and now feed it in manually and do the math. So it's
once though you create an asset after this, you now create your Chris Schmidt displacer, and you've done it once. You already had to do that anyway when you put the displaced deformer on the sphere. The only issue was it was a black box that you had no inherent, or you could not edit at all. This is completely opening up the engine to you to, if you think you can do it better, then get in there on the nodes and do it in your own way with your own parameters. Like maybe you want to have UV manipulation as well, or like multi-specular material management that are happening, like where you're weaving together different custom node materials. You know, the kind of stuff where you would be in the old object manager bound to using vertex maps with at this subdivision level would not work on a supercomputer.
Yes. No, well, first of all, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I'm super duper hyped about nodes. But what my point is one of the specialties of Cinema 4D is it's playful. You can just play around. When you get into the world of nodes, there's a lot less play and a lot more very intentional calculation. So I could just throw in a noise, like in regular cinema, I can just throw in the noise and be like, oh, let's try this noise. Let's try this one. Let's have it go up. Let's have it go down. Let's keyframe a parameter and scale it up. Here, it's like, very specifically, I had to make a decision that it was going to be animated. I had to very specifically make a decision that I wanted to travel upward at a particular speed and maybe propagate that out because it's an important node. So it's less playful, but it goes like infinitely deep. So that's kind of the trade-off. And I mean, for the most part, the cinema specialty, I think, is for years and years now has been, it's a tool that artists who are not necessarily very technical, and no matter what, if you're in the world of 3D, it's going to be a lot more technical than having a paintbrush and a canvas. So you need to know a little bit of math and rotations and all the different things. But once you go into nodes, it's like, no, now you got to know kind of coding ideas conceptually.
Yeah.
So less playful, but infinitely deep.
But I think in this technical preview, I totally agree. What my hope is that there's an object manager like connection and interface or relationship between the assets that we're building in here and what is being used by the user. Because before, this is no real different than an espresso tag on a sphere,
Right. Oh. All right, we'll give him a second. In the meantime, Noseman just sent me over a file where he correctly did, I think, the matrix thing. Uh-oh. I think I might have fully lost him.
I'm back.
Oh, there you go. I don't know what that song was, but now you're back. But
what
Noseman
I was saying was...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This internet thing is going to cause all kinds of interruptions. But no, I just hope that I hope that the playful nature of Cinema 4D is not threatened in any way, and that this is just a new tool for people that want less black box and less plugins to have a more altruistic, clean Cinema 4D only. You can do it all in the app. You don't have to buy Cinema and then $30,000 worth of random plugins.
Yes. No, I'm with you. But as someone who makes plugins for a living, and that's the only way I make money, you should still get plugins, everybody.
But you build assets. You sell the assets.
There is potential for that. And I'm curious where that ends up going. Right now, it is not structured at all for that to be the way to do it, and nothing can be protected. And
that's true.
So we'll see where that goes, especially right now. It'd be dangerous to make anything because, like I said, even the word from Maxon is like, hey, this is a test. Don't use this in production unless you really know what you're doing and expect it to break in future versions. Just to wrap up the thread before, it looks like Noseman gave us a file, and I missed one step, and that is when we shrank down the matrix. I needed to feed the matrix information as well, because otherwise it took the raw geometry and not the way it was modified. So that was the one thing we missed, and that's the thing. I don't want to call it a gotcha, but it's just like this is a bit of information you need to know if you want the translation to happen. We needed the matrix to have come across as well. And not knowing that one little bit, that could be a half hour of tinkering and reading and figuring out what's going on. Or like I did, I built it by modifying all the points individually. So there's a lot of potentially different directions to go. Things get super nuts there, and it is exciting. Thank you, man, for sending that.
Are there volume objects in there?
What do you mean? I don't
like.
Think
Is there a volume of any kind inside of the?
No, I don't think there's any volume. No, there's no volume or voxelizing or like intersecting.
That's gonna be fun. There's so many little things that I'm like, oh, when they flip that switch and they add that piece in there, oh boy.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, even in my head, it's like, oh, I can't wait until we have connectors that we could like have a loop connect the connector to the child, and then sweep them all to generate a spline, and now we have a dynamic chain automatically working. None of that stuff is implemented yet, but it will be. One day.
Yeah, I just love it's to me it's the land of what ifs that it's creating. Just the same way, like I'm so excited about like Nvidia and Apple both being like, I think we're building ARM GPU.
Dang it! Give him a moment. I'll just open another file while Casey comes back. Okay. Well, here's a pretty simple setup. Well, actually, it's not. There he is. Okay, finish your thought.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's the promise of the future or the idea of the future to come, and I'm really excited that Maxon like decided to do something very un-Maxon with this like tech preview. Like,
yeah, that's true.
So,
but yeah, Maxon never shipped anything unless it was like ready to go. And this time it's like, hey, like there's a lot of question marks here that we want to hear from the users. So here's the work in progress. So here's another concept. Yeah, here's a concept, Casey, that you'll be getting into plenty, I'm sure, but essentially the idea of loops. So there's a loop carried value. And the idea with this type of thing is I've got a range. Well, it's just a plane. And then I am manually selecting a single point right in the middle. So I'm literally selecting the middle point, turning that into the active selection, growing it. And then we go inside of a loop. And going inside the loop, this is where all the magic's happening, even though this is pretty simple. So what's happening is I'm saying I've selected all the geometry, shrink the selection, then extrude it, then output the resulting geometry, and then do it again. So it's going to shrink, extrude, output, shrink, extrude, output. And with that in mind, if I grab this range node, I could start increasing the range. And as I do, it's one extrude, shrink, and now that is just applied. But this, of course, will apply to anything I want to feed in anywhere. So this could be on anything that was open-ended. I think I could just search for actually I could just change the primitive. We can turn this into a disk shape. And I guess, is that something?
Probably have to extrude that first.
Maybe. It's probably the selection range I'm doing. I'm not even sure if that was an important thing to have in here. Well, okay, bad idea to change that because who knows what I broke. But inside that, if it was built correctly, you could output any geometry. But I absolutely love the idea of throwing things into a loop. So it's like I'm feeding geometry in, and at the end, I have to output geometry. And then that's what comes in on the next loop to do it again. And in this case, I went and even shrank the selection. And now I'm checking how many polygons are selected. And if there are 0 polygons selected, then don't output the result. Don't extrude. Instead, just grab what came in and output it directly. Skip over it. And the idea of looping that way can get really powerful. I love that because you get, every time you loop something in code, it's something repetitive and boring. So instead of having a shrink, extrude node again and again and again, I can do it infinity times by feeding it into this loop carried value. And now I can just type in a number and just get that to repeat again and again and again. And this could be this plane. I could make larger. Let's jump to 55 by 55, which is a lot. Oh yeah, like I said, it is starting from the center. Actually, I have a slightly newer version of this that I think is probably building the way I expected it to. Invert geometry selection. I don't know. which one,
And you
but
can
yeah.
also use random selections. So if you wanted to create a mountain range that was very low poly looking, you can start from a base of a noise selection. And then from that noise selection, you can iterate and add another selection type.
Yes. Oh, it gets absolutely madness. This is my version of the thing you pulled up, the elephant rig, but I wanted to build something like that from scratch. I think I have quite a bit of geometry, and it's probably got a cache. So yeah, give that a second. So here I'm
Oh,
feeding in a single sphere, but like
trigger
look at
warning.
oh yeah, a little tryptophobia here. Apologies for that. But I'm just starting out with a sphere, and whatever that sphere is doing, it's going to do so many things where I'm like subdividing, selecting, growing, melting, deleting, and it just goes on and on. It's just like step after step after step after step, and it goes down one tree, and then here it branches off to do noise displacement, and then they remerge back up here. One is a child of the other one, and all of it is just whatever geometry I fed in, and you can see how it just steps through, and it's not going to probably run too fast. Yeah. But yeah, you can see it.
It's moving pretty quick. I mean, like for how much geo you have going on there,
Yeah.
man. Just like it's that like think about once you get the handshake where you can create a selection based on the things that are in the inside of that, so that way you could pump some particles out whenever they get to a certain radius, and you can have like this like gas object, rich lord looking crazy creature, like that was not really feasible to procedurally build before.
Yeah. Like the possibilities start getting like pretty boggling. Like, yeah, here I dropped it to a cube, but let's subdivide the cube a few times. Not too much. Blump, blump, blump. Wait for the keyboard to refresh there.
And you can also, I mean, at the end of this whole thing, you can take the end operator and pump the end operator into an array operator that's then cloning these things and offsetting them.
Yes. And colorizing each one differently and scaling them and doing essentially all the MoGraph stuff on top of it. Here's where I'm at right now. This is literally I was working on this morning. And I don't have this color working yet, so I'll just skip over that. But this is something I've tried to do several times, even with like X particles, and there could be ways of doing it, but I really love kind of random growth. So the idea here is I'm just starting out with a sphere, and I'm entering into a loop, and well, let me just hit play. And what you're going to see is every single frame, it creates one more sphere, and it takes the previous position of the previous sphere and then adds a new random variable to it and then goes one step forward, and it just repeats that again and again. So essentially I'm going to have an infinite walking sphere here, just traveling around doing whatever it wants to. And in this particular case, I base it off of noise. So inside of here's my loop, and it even just goes to like right here, this is just my noise sampling right there. This is doing noise where I'm taking the current value, building a vector, checking 3 different noises so I can get 3 different random seeds, and then range mapping it. And then this is now a visual representation of regular Perlin noise traveling step by step. And at any given point, I could say, you know what, I want to change the scale of the noise. So I could double the scale of the noise. Well, and by increasing the number, it shrinks the noise. And so now this is a smaller sample. So you see it got a lot more essentially detailed. It's turning quicker. If I make it larger, it's going to turn slower, and we get these nice smooth moving ones. But you could imagine even iterating that several times where I could feed in one noise sample large and another one that's small, and then get like tiny variations while still having overall threads as this goes through. And I get play, and this will just keep on generating more and more different ones. And it's just something if you asked me how to do this before, I mean, you could have randomly drawn a spline and cloned onto them step by step, but that's not what this is doing. This is generating them each one. So like after I get more of this working, it would be like, oh, now I want to create a branching point, and from some branching point that will start spawning off from somewhere else and get some like crazy growth going. So that's where my brain immediately goes, and I'm just barely beginning to tinker and learn the different things to do.
Or making strange attractors, like very simple, cosmic-based noise algorithms, using rotational values that increase. The thing that made me like legitimately just smile so wide was that you're on frame 1068, and when you changed a parameter, there was no resolve, there was no recalc, there was no reanimation. It updated from 0 to 10,068.
Yep.
Like you didn't have to go all the way back and play all the way again, which was something that is inherent to the workflow with particles or generative stuff inside of Cinema 4D. You generally have to start spamming Shift F to make sure that you've reinitialized your scene all the way at 0 because you changed a parameter. but you can jump to frame 30,000 and change
Yeah.
your noise values, and it's going to propagate on that frame with that new calculation.
Yeah, it will have to catch up a little bit. And the way you build is super important. I have an earlier version of the scene file. Once again, it was all happening today. But in this particular case, what I'm doing, without going into the super specifics, is I'm building an array. So an array is just a list. So I'm building an array of positions. So every time it iterates through here, it's saying, hey, here's another position. And then the next one gets made. It's like, what was my previous position? Oh, okay, I've got that. Now modify it in some way and it add it to the end of the list. And it makes the list longer and longer and longer. And then at the end, it's now taking that entire list and then feeding that into a matrix, and that is automatically making clones effectively. But in a slightly earlier version of this, I was doing it a completely different way, and it was actually really slow because instead of building a list and then at the very end generating all the geometry, I was generating a sphere and then connecting it and outputting that geometry. And the next one, it would feed that geometry back in again, add another sphere, output all the geometry. So it was like doing a connect and then 2 connects and then 3 connects and then 4 connects. And it kept on doing that down the line. And by changing the order of operations, I got like up, 10,000 times the speed by making sure that it was the correct order of operations. Like when I was doing that version, if I went above 10, it got dangerous to change a parameter because of how long it took to refresh. And now, now we can scroll around and I can just scrub the timeline. You can see how it's like growing on and off. And once again, like you said, it's deterministic. So this is just built in. It's like it was always going to end here. There's no randomness.
Yeah. So now you have a cloner object that you can do crazy things with that is set up, and you can optimize it. It's not the cloner object that was released. And I'm not trying to pick on the cloner object or Per or anyone at Maxon about the cloner object not really getting quality of life improvements to support the more clones demand that I've always given it. But I can now go in there and go like, oh no, Chris, your cloner object is a little too slow. I made this one change and now it's this much faster.
Yep.
Like, and it doesn't require a release cycle update to change that, which is the benefit, which is one of those, with great power comes great node responsibility.
Yes, I totally agree. And there are I've run into a lot of learning troubles, and I've always found a way of completing it. But as of right now, there are plenty of things. There's everything I'm showing. I had to do like a dozen versions that I did wrong before I got one that worked correctly. And I think that everybody who gets into it is going to have that same workflow. And our job right now as users is to tinker around and to tell Maxon what we're tripping over and what could be smoother and what, where I want like an automatic name, like ports getting automatically named or being able to drag something. What you were talking about, like it sounds like you would really love if there's an ability to add like an extra little dot on this one so you could drag it to a new location so that if these are all linked out, that they're not, the wires aren't crossing over each other.
Knuckles and stuff like that. Like every other node system has those. I'm sure eventually we'll get some of those improvements. I'm more into seeing things get switched on and abilities to be added. Like if there's a caching object that gets used into there, where if you really want geometry and you don't want to have to do an instance each time in an array, and you literally want a sphere for every single new instance, then I want a cache object that you run after that, like an internal system to support that sort of like structure. Have you figured out how to create, so in this example you have where you're doing your walker, have you been able to figure out how to do a random selection on each one of those things?
Poof. I haven't even attempted it. And yeah, as each sphere gets, they're all getting created right here by this matrix, essentially. So possibly we could extract, let's see, there's no geometry
let's
yet.
Just try to do like a random selection extrusion on them.
Well, let's go. I'm going to make it real small so we can. We always work simple because you never know what's going to take a long time to calculate. And I'll go a fewer. So you're saying, well, see, here's the tricky part, and I'm not even sure I'm doing this correctly with the array because if I was outputting a count, then we could be getting any given number and then feed that into like a selection. But right now, I'm not sure we could get those numbers. Well, here I got a couple ideas. What you want to do right now is do a random selection on the sphere, and then we'll feed the geometry in there, and then we want to do an extrude
on the generated spheres, not that sphere.
Well, but here's what. Well, yeah, I agree. The generated spheres, but it needs to exist here at some point. So we could do that and then feed this in. Now, my assumption would be, and I don't think it's going to be set up to do it, but right now, I think all of them are going to, yeah, right now they seem identical. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But my thought would be is like right here, we have the random selection and as a seed. So if we were to feed in something like our array out or our range or something that was keying off of
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that each one of these is different, then each one of those could be potentially fed a different random seed. I don't know that I built this correctly. So what I'm going to attempt to do is grab a hash. And a hash is really weird. I think it's some coding term that I'm not familiar with it. But essentially, I think of it as a random. It's like a random combined with a range mapper. So essentially, if I were to feed in a seed, and that can take in like anything. So I'm going to feed my array out in, and now it's outputting randomly any of these variables. So I could say I just want a random integer, and we could try putting this out, but there's a good chance that it just doesn't
Seed.
like it. Whoa, no, wait,
Woo!
did no? Well, they all changed to be identical. So it did
Aw.
change it, but they're all the same. So, but it's because right now I'm feeding out an entire array, so it might just see the array and not do it. So we need to iterate the array. Currently, there's nothing I have that says this is number 1, this is number 2, and I don't know how to do that yet. But I bet you
Okay.
whatever it ends up being will be fairly trivial.
That I've been trying to figure out sort of that kind of stuff too, because that becomes like once you see that random walker having all kinds of like crazy abstract motion graphic like deformations happening and they're all unique, suddenly the prospect of making like a really cool snow simulation with unique snowflakes falling is really fun.
Yes. No, I'm right there. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It just goes to, like I said, right now I'm having to brute force a lot of it and like go to the help and read about each individual node and see what is doing what. And like, I don't fully have my head wrapped around this hash. Like I said, I'm not sure about my usage of arrays here and, and how essentially how things iterate. And even there's different iteration. I think there's some sort of, like index iterator, like maybe that, if we put it index
Ooh, index
iterator in the right
iterator.
spot, it might do something, but I don't like, well, I mean, that says array in, so I'll take
All right, man.
the array in, and then we could take the index out and then maybe feed that to the seed. No,
Uh,
that's the, I don't even know what that did because now everything's extruding. So yeah, but it just goes to like, maybe that was the right thing to do. Maybe it's not. And I just have to read up on it and learn what each node does and how they combine.
is there a print or a result?
Yes, there's a print and there's a console. I've been more using console. Um, So console out. It's a little clunky right now because the only way to use it is to interject it into some place that is ultimately getting fed out to the scene. So I think I could put one right there. And now you see these numbers are being fed out here. And indeed, you see it's outputting like 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. I think it will repeat itself. And I'm not sure what triggers a refresh. It's also super important to not leave these running all the time because printing things to the console is really slow. Like it does, and you print to the console all the time when you're writing code. And every time you print to the console, you're taking like a one, it's like 10,000 times slower to calculate. So you gotta be careful about leaving those plugged in. But yeah,
Gotcha.
it has been really good to be like, okay, what is it outputting anything? Like sometimes that might say null pointer because it's got nothing. Um, but yeah, I just don't know what to connect into where. Random selection. Actually, even that was supposed to, be fed into seed, which is fed into integer. But yeah, there's going to be some tinkering to figure it out. Yeah, right now they're all still getting the same one, but I guarantee that there's a way to do it. I just don't have it. Um, and I think
Because that's
most.
great for like creating debris,
Oh
like
yeah, that's true.
for like making like an explosion, like something that hits the ground and you want to like have a bunch of stuff animate up and you want your rocks to be different each time, like infinite rock pile generation, rather than like having a cloner object with like 50 versions of a rock that you've created from Voronoi chunks. Like they're just constantly being procedurally randomly generated. Super cool tools.
Yeah, yeah. It starts boggling the mind of all the things that could be potentially done. The earlier I had asked Rick if there was if there's any kind of smooth deformer, and he's like, no, there's not a smooth function yet, and I'm sure that there will be. But then I think he asked somebody, or somebody had already gone and made a Laplacian smoothing. So inside here, they're taking the raw geometry and then they're using the nodes, grabbing all of the points, and then inside
Mm.
there Now that this is the math to do a smoothing. So it's like everything is getting the point information and then getting its neighbors and then averaging the values between neighbors and then repeating that process however many times we iterate. And the end result of that is as I iterate, I'm now getting the smoothing. So this is the actual raw math behind the Cinema 4D smoothing. And here it is broken out into individual nodes. I mean, the same thing goes like you could probably create an extrude from math. Do you want to do that? No, it's great to have a node that has all those core functionalities, but having a smoother is amazing. And the fact that I could take this and bake it as an asset and now use this wherever I want to smooth my model and then continue from there, like extruding and modifying, like that is really powerful. Now, the hope, of course, would be that we get all these functions, all these core modeling functions all built in the next version of Cinema. But yeah, that's where it does get exciting. If Cinema doesn't do it, well, go ahead and build it yourself. Now it does.
Or even if they're just, or like, I mean, everything in the application itself is as a program. It's a non-black box version of itself. Like the cube exists as a completely open concept that you could edit if you were behind the source code. So
yeah, well, if you're Maxon, you can see the code that made the cube.
Yeah, but if you in this context, like it's I don't know, it's very exciting.
Yeah. It's a little intimidating, but it's also very, very, very exciting. Okay, I don't know where to go from here. Where do you want to steer this, Casey?
I don't know.
Like we haven't talked too much about cloner stuff, but here's the thing: is like Maxon spent a lot of time making things to work, essentially, like recreating a lot of cloner MoGraph type functionality, and that's where they spent a lot of their time. But what's funny is to me that is significantly less interesting right now as a playground, because we could already do that with cloners, but we couldn't
have mode dynamics.
Yeah, and have dynamics and things layered on top of that. But when it comes to generating new geometry and like you're saying, like dual meshes and just feeding it right, we couldn't do that before. So that's why I'm more excited than spending my time in that, even though that was, kind of snuck in at the very end.
Merkle could do it.
What's that?
Merkle could do it.
Yeah.
He would end up posting something on Twitter like, no plugin dual mesh with volume attribution. And you'd be like, how did you do that?
Yeah. Well, and even that, I mean, one of my most recent tutorials was all about like modifying your mesh in all these crazy ways, and ultimately it was just like combining extrudes and inter extrudes and smoothing and subdividing on top of each other. But you do have the ability to essentially make a cloner from scratch and then make your own fields and your own effectors by layering them all up. But I just haven't gotten into it too much. But yeah, the idea of physically, I think I had a version of this where it was doing more like what you're talking about, where I was modifying every single clone, but clone fields. Yeah, maybe I didn't save that one. But it was like every sphere was getting smaller as it went up the line.
I'm in there. Like I am in it in my heart and I'm excited about it. But at the same sense, I am so afraid to get too attached to any specific thing and just watch it, change dramatically or just, be undone or be the thing that breaks the project that I'm working on.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I mean, I gotta say, like, well, here's my folder, which I cleaned up a little bit, but as you see, here's my scene files as I've been slowly iterating. And sadly, I've got my new plugin Recall out in the world, but because this doesn't exist in the object manager, I can't use Recall with it. But here's all the scene files I've made. But this represents like literally like 24 hours of playing around. And it's taken a long time to go from step to step to be like, okay, I've gotten it to do something new I didn't previously understand. But this is like 8 hours of work, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of work again and again, learning the different nodes. So this is not, and I have a background in like doing some code stuff and knowing, like, I know what a matrix is as far as transforms are concerned. Like there's a lot of people who would be like, I want to move this and rotate it. It's like, what's a matrix? So like, if you're just an artist type, modeling things in cinema, why would you want to think about a matrix? But now there is a reason to learn.
Or if you're in another package and you felt that there wasn't enough black box constructs inside of Cinema 4D for you to consider it as your next package, Now there's something that says like, oh, maybe I won't learn Bifrost. Maybe I will go over to cinema.
Yes. No, well, I mean, I'm super excited here. And I've told my brothers that they should start preparing themselves, that there's a good chance that we'll start making some of our tools like as assets. We're not there yet, but it's like, no, these will translate and go along with cinema. So yeah, that's pretty powerful. Actually, that's an important question. We got to make sure that Maxon does it. But like the assets, where do they get saved, and do they come along with the scene file? Because if you have to manually install an asset for it to work, then that's just as bad as having a plugin.
Well, go to the right click area where you see assets, or go to the assets tab, like where you see console out and stuff, and right click over there. Because there's this context menu that I learned about today. Like no, where there's like where it's like info or like under utility. Actually, here.
I mean, if we can go into one of the assets.
If you share
Yeah.
screen with me, I can show you.
Yep. Okay, you're steering.
Okay, so there's this thing right here: mount database zip, unmount data, like create
Yeah.
new, like this,
Okay.
and import assets, and you can categorize things and you can organize things. There's an asset that Rick shared with me that has like a really wild forest. The viewport will take a moment to update because this is dense. This is like a forester scene sort of. But in order to get it to work, I had to right click, mount asset zip, and in this folder, it's in this, where is it? The Rocket Lasso folder. In this, I have a zip that has all of these different objects inside of it. So let's see if it loads up. Oh, there we go. So this is a very heavy scene, and unfortunately I saved it with a lot of high geometry in the build.
Yeah, it has to generate it that first time.
It has to build it the first time, but it's a very cool, complicated forest. Like there's a lot of control and there's a lot of this is like a very advanced asset that shows where you start running into some trouble, and it lets you control different branch components. But in order to even get it to work at first, I had to load a zip archive that had the associated models and stuff to go along with it. So to say that there's a lot to learn still is like, here we go, unmount database. Then I have these databases to select. I have materials and scene nodes and utilities. So there's a certain level of UX to me that currently feels like, what is this? How does this work? And I haven't played around with this enough to know entirely how to navigate it.
Well,
it's so heavy.
I'm still in like the basement level of like, I want to learn individual nodes and how they connect to each other. And then it starts getting to like, okay, start grouping things, and then you start building assets out of them, and then you can use your assets to build more complicated things. But then even the idea of like sharing them with other people, or let's say I had a FARS generator and I want to sell it. How would I go about like packaging it and people loading it? And that there's a question there, because it could be essentially as complicated as a plugin. If the render farm doesn't have that asset, it might not work.
Yeah, so. When I save file with assets, like you want to assume that these assets are saved with it as well, but we don't know that yet.
No, we don't know.
What did I just do? I just broke something.
Yeah, you turned off the wood, the branches.
I just changed the seed on that. Plain. Anyway, I thought this asset was pretty great. And there's, I almost broke it earlier because I was like, oh, I wonder what happens when I change this effector over here. It's distributing on this mesh, and the mesh is just a primitive. But if I changed it to, maybe it'll work now.
You should probably slightly decrease the number of trees for. Oh yeah. My goodness.
So yeah, things get crazy real quick.
Yeah. Well, with nodes, everything is filtering from something else.
Yeah, I'm going to spam escape. But you can take back the screen from now.
Yeah. Somebody was just asking if I could copy that smoothing file into my other one, and I haven't tried, so let's give it a go. In fact, they're just taking in geometry and outputting geometry. So if I copy this as like raw nodes and I go into my, what's a good one? Well, let's go into my pyramid. So here's this pyramid. I'll unbreak it. File, revert to saved. And so if I were to take this and start increasing the count of the pyramid, then cool, it's doing that. But let's paste in this smoothing. So this is outputting geometry. So let me see if I can feed that into the smoothing, output the end result of that smoothing.
I tried this earlier. It works.
Yeah, smoothing. So now that asset, it's not even an asset, it's just a group. But that group it takes raw geometry and smooths it out. And now this has the ability to smooth.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can greeble that now.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Well, yeah, we could take this, get a random.
Or there's a greeble asset built in.
Oh, yeah, there is a greeble. It doesn't go that far. But, I mean, it's always more fun here to say, okay, let's grab a random selection. And then we can extrude. And we'll extrude those. We need to, it's got random selection, please. So that's randomly selecting. Let's use islands. Yep, those have become islands. I want there to be slightly fewer selected, so I'll drag this back a bit. And this could be, let's add a bunch of offset variation. And then we could do the same thing again. Let's copy and paste. Now I could do some iteration here with the loop carried value, but let's just take that geometry and do another random selection and then another random extrude. I'll make sure it's a different seed and it will feed that out. So now I've taken the end result of that one and then fed it through again. So now we get 2 levels of extrude, and this could even extrude a side polygon somewhere. So one of these on an edge, yeah, like here, you can see that one is extruding out sideways. And of course, these have all the settings for like where they get cut off. So this one should probably be a little lesser. And yeah, so that stuff layers up. And the idea of being able to build your own greebles this way is crazy. And then subdivisions you can limit subdivisions to selections, which is not something I had realized right away. I'm going to delete, let's not delete those. I'll just skip over them.
Which is amazing because CV Subdeformer, which was like my first feature request in 2009 to Rick, I remember the first time I met him.
I remember that.
Is there a way to just randomly select so that way I can just subdivide specific things? First thing I ever asked Rick when we were talking. I said it a lot more loud and probably a lot more intoxicated. But it became a CV tool, and now it's just boop 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 boop.
But yeah, here I can grab a random selection from here, subdivide it, and now look at these random subdivisions. Individual polygons have gotten subdivided, and we could rip, once again, iterate or just copy and paste this again. Grab the end result of that, subdivide randomly one more time. Make sure it's a different random seed, and now we get look at all these extra layers, and now we take this, and I'll feed that into my little extrude greeble thing we just manually made. And it'll extrude from those random bits of geometry. And now look at this crazy thing. And this is all just built off my little pyramid steps. And we've now got this crazy geometry going. So yeah, it gets crazy fast. So yeah, exciting.
Yeah, exciting. This is so great. So cool. Because you can then, yeah.
Well, and
it's very, very powerful.
Yeah. Well, and these subdivisions that are happening, those didn't have to be. I could make the second one not be smooth, so now it's very polygon. So you can start seeing where you might get city blocks subdivided, and then extruding random buildings and doing an inner offset and having the results of one. You could make a very simple city generator from this very quickly.
You can have them, scale down the poly, then extrude. And then connect back and all that good stuff. Can you run through? Are you comfortable enough with the loop iterate just to actually show how? Because I think that the loop iterate function and the looping in this is a lot simpler than playing with it in an Unreal or in Houdini, where I always have to look at a reference file where I've set up a loop.
Yeah, potentially. Well, let's see if we can I know this idea in general, but we can tweak it however we want to. So let's start completely from scratch. Now we can there's 2 different ways of grabbing any bit of basic geometry. You can grab the plane, and that's just a geometry, or you can grab a primitive operation, which is actually several things combined. And this has the ability to change into any of the other objects. So that's pretty cool. And you can just take the geometry out of it. So we'll start with that one. All right, so we've got that. So what I'm thinking is we want to take the raw geometry and feed it to a loop. So I'll search for loop, and here is our loop carried value. And that's essentially like almost like an iterator. Now here's where I might trip over myself, but we have a variable in here, variable one, and we need to tell it what that is going to be. So we have, these are the common ones. So we have bools and ints and floats. And I mean, I always, do you do this as well where you overvalue, not overvalue, you assume what you know that everyone knows that. And I do it all the time. And I make the assumption of like basic color theory, like everybody knows basic color theory. And then I did one of those, a couple of years ago, but I went to one of those, painting, like you go out with friends and drink and paint. And the amount of like grown adults who like didn't know how to make the color green from the primary colors. And it was like, wow, like I take a lot of my knowledge for granted. So for me,
that just happened to me. I was like, you don't know yellow and blue and green.
Yeah, you don't know how to mix yellow and blue to make green. And I mean, well, the point being is I just make an assumption that everybody knows this. But on some levels, it's a little bit of specialized knowledge. And along those lines, like I'm just skipping over the idea of a bool and a float and an int. But like a bool is true or false, or 0 and 1, which are essentially true or false. But then a float, this is like decimal places. You can have decimals. But an int, these are whole numbers. And every one of these has different function. They have different functionality. You got to keep those in mind. So anyway, this wants to iterate a bunch of times, but what does it want to iterate? Well, we want to iterate actually is geometry, and that is not in this main list. So yet you have to click on this extra list, and this gets intimidating really quick. Where it's like, okay, here's the basic ones, here's the advanced ones, here's all modules, and look at this flyout of flyouts. And it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Maxon denoiser?
Yeah, so it just goes to...
What the hell is that?
Well, that's probably for the materials, but the point being is there is an insane amount of like data types. Each of those is a data type. Now, here's what Noseman actually taught me, which is really good, is if you click on any node, if you have the info tab, so if you right-clicking, actually have asset and info open. So here's information about the node, but if I click on geometry as one of these little outputs, it'll just give me information about that. And it is a port type geometry object. So that's what we want. We want a geometry object. So clicking on this loop carried value, I want this to be a geometry asset. Now here's where things still are intimidating. I can search for the word geometry, but I still have to go into these flyouts and find it inside of where these are. And you'll still see that even just searching for geometry, there's all these different types of geometry just in all those giant lists. Now,
the black box is too deep.
Yeah, so in this case, the one that we do want is under abstraction geometry object. So that is now a geometry object. So this is the variable one. So that I can rename that geo, and it's actually outputting as well. So that's the geo, and there we go. So I can say that is my geometry, and I could output that, and it'll do something. Now to start out, I think before we feed in our geometry, how about we set our active selection? So I'm going to search for active. And search for selection, and I want a selection range. So once again, I want to select all my geometry. So here's my raw geo. I want to select select all polygons, and that becomes what is actively selected. So now that that's happened, I think I guess the first one could work. So now I've got geometry I'm feeding in with a selection. So that, and I think the selection carries over with the geometry. So I'll feed that in. So now that we've done that,
let's go a tag or whatever.
Now here's something that's a little frustrating is even though I renamed these ports on the outside, on the inside, it didn't carry over. That's probably just a quality of life thing that they will get to. But to stay organized here, I'll type in geo as well on those. So that should be my geometry coming out, and then we could do something to it and then feed it back out again, and it will loop. So let's do that same thing I had done before, which is, I guess in this case, the first thing I want to do is extrude. So let's search for an extrude. And I would like to take my geometry, and I want it to use islands, and I want to extrude upward 20. That's fine. And then we will output, that is the end result. That's perfectly fine. So we are now doing something to our geometry and then spitting it out. Let's actually make it real. So I'll search for geometry operation. Connect it there.
Can you promote the actions inside the loop carried value to the top so that way you don't have to go back inside to change islands or not islands?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I think you can literally do that.
You just drag them over, or
Yeah, let's try. Well, I think if I right click, no, you can't right click there.
why was there espresso? You
Yeah,
can
it's the
set
old.
driven, set driver.
Maybe. I mean, these are keyframeable, so you might be able to
Whoa,
drive these with espresso, which is
the
intimidating to
the
think about.
ultimate bottleneck.
I'm not sure. Let me see. There's not. Can I drag this here? No. But let me search for a constant. Actually, I think it's a value, but if I search for the word constant, then I can drag a value, and that's just a constant number. And if I feed this in, I could say I want this to link to what were we doing? Oh, islands. Use islands. There it is. So there's islands. And now I've kind of popped this out. Now that it lives here, inherit, remove unused. I thought we could.
Noseman says add inputs. So
Well, no, I
maybe
know we can't, but there's a way of promoting the node. Actually, yeah, there. Oh, there we go. So if you grab the little dot, I dragged it over. I could say propagate
okay.
port, and then it even takes the name, and
Boom,
that
yeah.
has now moved out to this layer, and there's use island. So now this lives outside of the loop.
That's great.
Yeah. So yes, you indeed can do that.
Very easy to create tools that way. Like
yes.
having
Super important. Manually, what you can do is right click, say add new import, but check out this interface. Oh my god, it's the most intimidating thing ever.
Yeah,
Here's
that's
just
why I asked. I did that this morning.
Right. So there's edit port or edit resource. They're essentially the same thing, but let me click edit resource and look at this interface. Now, when we're coding things, we're actually coding all of these parameters behind the scenes, and you just wouldn't know it in the interface. But this is like every type of interface and every variable that might be a part of it, and there's so many extra details. So yeah, that gets intimidating quick. So the idea of being like, propagate this port. It's like, thank you, we need that very badly. Okay. Anyway, this is So we can promote those out. Although it was a little bit of a pain to get it out up a layer, so I could drag it, but maybe I'm doing it wrong, or maybe there's more to do there. Having said all that, this is now extruding the geometry. We output that as the final, and then we're saying, okay, now make it real. Now I am going to save this because there's a good chance I do something to crash because of connecting, like doing some sort of infinite loop that it doesn't like. We'll just call it loop. So now that we've done that, let's go back inside and make it a little bit. Well, now let's repeat it somehow. And right now, here's a super nice basic version. Is if we create a range. So once again, type in the word range. There's flow control. So now it's a range, and essentially this is an iteration by itself. So it's going to start at 0 and to go up to whatever number. So let's say 10. So it's going. This is actually kind of outputting from the range node 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to output all the numbers. So if we drag that to inner scope, and I don't know the difference between inner and outer. I just know inner is the one we want right now. As soon as I drag it over, I've now said repeat this action 10 times. And we said to extrude, so it is extruding 10 times. And now that is outside of it. We can repeat it as many times as we want, and that's what we get, extrusions. So that's kind of nice right there. But of course, that's the most basic version because we could extrude, and then, as I had said before, we could do something like shrink. So I can search for the word shrink, and there is a shrink selection. So I will feed that in, shrink the selection. So now it's just doing the normal Cinema 4D shrink your selection by 1. So it extrudes, shrinks the selection, and then repeats. And now it will do that step repeating as many times as we tell this to go. And that will just go shrink, 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 shrink. And then we just get those stacked up. Now, what's funny is this is why I built in that limiter in my other one. And nothing's ever quite as simple as you think it's going to be. And that's because as I increase this, there is always a selection. Actually, let's go to Polygon so you can possibly see. Yeah, here. You can see what the selection is as we go each step. I guess it'll disappear as I select through, but eventually our selection is going to go to nothing. It's going to go to 0. And when it goes to 0, when nothing is selected, it's as if everything is selected. And now everything's getting extruded. And there's probably a lot of nonsense in this geometry. There's a lot happening. So every extrusion here is going to be extruding everything, which is not what we want. So you could just be like, well, I'll trust the user to not break it. But when you're making tools and making proper assets, you can't do that. It could get exponentially more complex. So that's where this went into going through and reading the geometry and saying if the selection equals 0, then don't do the selection. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can see how this could iterate and change and Yeah, it's pretty neat how all those can modify, and other things can grow and increase, and we could have more values looping. Like every step that we extrude up could be getting longer or shorter than the one before it. It's infinite combinations. And once again, going back to this original shape, hopefully because it's so simple now, I can change this to a disc shape. And there we go. Now you can see that, there's too many extrusions for the subdivisions we fed it. So that got weird quick. So let's only do 2. Yeah. So watch how this breaks. This is where if you feed it, if you don't put the limitations in, if we do 0 iterations, but now we're going to extrude and shrink, extrude and shrink, extrude and shrink. Now it can't do it again. So when I do it, you see it's making really bad, weird geometry. And once we get up to 10, it's even starting to kind of do this mirroring down. And this is bad geometry. There's a lot of intersecting polygons here that should not be that way.
Yeah, that's crazy. Where would you replace the FX selection range with the noise selection to get a noise selection so it's not just a pyramid? So that way you could effectively be creating like rolling hills on a plane.
How would I do that?
Because right now,
I guess
you're selecting all with selection range.
Yeah. There you go. I know what you mean. So yeah, let's go back to the plane. Keep it simple. And now these are going to keep shrinking. But if we set a random selection to start out.
Yeah. I also saw there was a noise selection.
Yes,
which
there is.
I like.
Which is even better in a lot of ways. Well, let's try it. Select. Here's a. Where is it? There it is. Noise selection. So I want this noise selection instead. So that gets fed the geometry. That outputs the geometry. Oh, sorry. This outputs the selection. There's always so many interesting variables because here, it's doing something. Oh, I should have, here's where you have to be careful. Remember I was saying how it's really dangerous to, there's probably a lot of very small selections and theirs are going to be exploding in weird ways. And that's where we should have built the limiter into it. Because this is probably but every extrude is creating more geometry, which the next extrusion is creating more geometry. It's going to keep on doing that more and more and more and more. So it did finish. Go. Well, no, but this is dangerous. You saw how long that took to calculate. I should only be doing one layer, but here you can see a single random noise selection gives us this. And if we increase it by 1, then it's going to shrink. And we can increase it by 1, it's going to shrink. But as soon as there is not, so that's as far as we can, actually, it's not as far, but very soon. Yeah, see, that's too far. So this is as far as we could go. But it did create, kind of some nice random hills here by doing that. And we could have been randomly shrinking via some variable in there as well. But let's go copy, actually, it might still be copied, paste. No, it's not. Let me go grab that smoothing again, which is great. Grab our nice smoothing. This really needs to get built into Cinema because look at how much I'm already using it. So let's take the end final result, feed that in.
Save as asset.
And there we go. Now we get smooth rolling hills, each getting pulled out. And that probably doesn't need to smooth that much. Just a little bit will go a long way.
You probably want to only select the after first iteration if that's possible. Because see how it's displacing the whole floor?
Yeah, we should be able to do that pretty easily. Let's do another active selection, and let's select selection range, pull this back in. I want to take the geometry. I want to select all polygons, and then I want to set that as the active selection of this geometry. And now that is the active selection. If I were to output that, no smoothing, but now you can see all polygons are selected. So then if I do a shrink selection, I guess this might not be exactly what you meant, but I should be able to at least get the edges doing what I'm doing here. Actually, well, yeah, this will work, but I was trying to think of this a fancier way. So now that we've got this more limited selection, we could put it might work. Let's put that into the smoothing. Break that, feed it in here. There's a thing where if nodes aren't exactly the same, you can't replace them. I don't know if that worked. Inside the smoothing, there might be some sort of select all or something. So maybe that's not a way of doing it. But once again, that goes to maybe I go in and modify this asset to have different selections. But yeah, I think you were saying that we could go and modify the original selection. I don't know that we could translate that over, but there's even something called transfer selection, but I'm not entirely sure what that does.
Well, no, that's cool. That's just I just wanted to just kind of point out how because the pyramid thing, I think whenever I see it get applied with noise or some other random thing, that's when I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because
Oh yeah.
I've seen like ladder examples and pyramid examples, and I'm like, well, how do you do it? But that was a really great way to explain the loop iterate. I really that helped me for going forward in experimenting.
Yeah, and it can get super crazy. I've definitely you saw my other one where I was generating the spheres, and there was like so many more nodes and so many more parameters being kept track of. But yeah, as a super simple version, and yeah, this landscape is pretty cool to be able to generate this. And of course, the difference here being is if we just were feeding in, if we in this we were just feeding the
Oh, you can always just connect the original plane back in as well, and that would fuse the flat plane to the bigger one, right?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if there's a weld yet. I don't
Okay,
know if there's
I
any
thought that Connect
optimize
might have
or
been doing a
weld.
weld.
I thought it did too, and now that actually now we can find out because we have a smoothing. So let's go ahead and modify this. I'll save it because this is working. So here's the thought. Currently, we have this noise selection and we're feeding it to an active selection, and that's what's getting fed in. But what if we go back to this step and once again, if you want to see what's getting output, what I typically have been doing is searching for an extra geometry operation, dragging that here where we're working, and I can feed this in, and then that can be fed out to the scene. So now you can see kind of where we are right now, and this can just travel along with us. But anyway, it is currently selecting this noise selection. So here's the thought. What if we were to invert this? So we'll search for invert. So this is invert selection. So we're going to take this noise selection, do the opposite. Here's a feature request, Maxon, if anybody's watching. I want to be able to select multiple ports and then drag them to a new connection. But in this case, I'll just connect that over here, shrink that selection, and then that can go fed. Actually, let's not feed it yet because now I'm inverting, and now I want to delete. So let's delete. So this will delete the inverted noise selection, which means we should end up with just the base of the hills. Yeah, cool.
Oh yeah,
So
there you
that's
go.
just the base of the hills. So now that could be what gets fed into our geometry to get extruded. So we should end up with the same end result effectively. So let's let that go and do its thing. Turn off the smoothing. Also, it seems that this is too many range. Once again, we'd be smart to limit that some. Oh, it deleted. I
Oh,
have to
we're deleting it
reselect.
beforehand.
Well, there's zero selection here. Once again, like I said, things
Right,
get
right,
applied
right.
to the selection. So I need another select all. So I'll just copy and paste this select all. Actually, that's not a select all, but I do need an active selection. So I've deleted everything, but deleting meant nothing is selected. So if I feed that in to a new active selection, it's possible. No, let's just do another all. I'll say select selection range, take all the geometry, select all the polygons, turn that into my active selection. And that active selection is what will get fed into the geometry. There we go. So now I can step this up as many times as is valid, which is that. So those are now extruded upward. But here's where things get interesting. We'll see if this works. Is once again save because it's working. We've now got. We can go to an earlier state before we inverted. So here's where that noise selection was happening. So what if we were to output?
They need a quick link to scene,
They really do. They
like
super
yeah,
need one. But anyway,
before.
here is, yeah, that's the active selection. So if I do this, you'll see that it's actually selecting all the geometry, and you can see what the island is selecting. So now I think we just need to delete this because it's not inverted. So we need to delete all the other bits.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll delete that. And that now you see the remainder. This is everything that's not getting extruded. So that is now a different piece of geometry. And though that can continue over to here where we've done all of our extra modifications. So now we could do a parent-child relationship, but obviously that won't weld. But there's a chance that this connect will, but I don't know if it does. So put a connect. And yeah, there's no like checkboxes or anything. So I don't think this will work. But I'll feed in that raw. We don't want the geometry up. I just want the raw geometry. So that's the remaining ground. And now let's take the geometry that is all of the hills. That now gets combined into one super mesh, which is represented by this, which can be fed into our final geometry output. which now goes into the scene. And now those are two separate models that have been remerged into one. But now let's see if the smoothing works. And it will smooth, but I don't know if they'll be welded together. We'll do that. Oh, doesn't like that. So I'll break. I don't know what it is. You see how that's geometry and that's geometry? But if I try and bridge them, oh, now it worked. Okay, well, you see it's not, they are not welded. And I don't know if there's a weld function yet anywhere. There could be, but now you can see how we have these two different objects. That just looks like there's some nice rivers going around.
Yeah, there's roads.
But what's great about like even this basic setup is if this was just a flat plane and we were displacing it, then as you go vertical, you lose geometry. But now we're extruding and creating more geometry as we go up and up and up more levels. So you end up with a cool, the extra geometry here, which is
it's super cool. Yeah, weld needs to happen.
Yeah, weld, we definitely do need weld for a lot of reasons. And like I said, it could be here. There might just be a checkbox I'm missing. And if it's not, there's a good chance that we could write the correct node sequence that would weld them together. So that worked pretty well. I'll save that. And for everybody who's watching, any scene files you see me save and create here, then those will be available on Patreon if you're supporting over there. Where should we go from here?
I guess I don't know. Well, I think it's 2 p.m. actually.
It's about 2. So if there's any wrap-up questions here, everybody, and then we are going to wrap it up. Actually, we did get to make a couple of cool things here, more than I thought we would. Because like I said, I'm still a little bit intimidated by, it's like, well, I just don't know how to scale it. Like, I guess it's a dead end. You can watch me for a half hour try and figure it out. Luckily, Noseman was here to give us an example. But yeah, there's always that one little node you're not quite sure how to connect. Let's see.
There wasn't really any caches. Someone asked if there was a way, or if someone asked if there was a way to get the geometry back into Cinema. As far as I know, file export Alembic, file export FBX is the only way to do that right now.
Yes, I think you are correct in that. I asked Rick, and he said that's the way to bring it back in. It's funny that this does exist as Alembic, but it doesn't exist in the object manager at all. So you could bake out an animation and then bring it in via Alembic, which is funny that a software itself, a software needs to export and import to see its own results. But once again, this is a, what do they call it?
Technology preview.
Technology preview. And that's why that's the case. And then actually Rick is saying that there's going to be more blogs and explanations of the roadmap of where things are going in the coming months.
In the coming months. Man, do you remember when it was like you'd hit NAB and be like, oh, what's coming up in R19? Oh, what's coming up in R18? And even back then I was like, is there a new espresso?
Yeah.
And then it would be like, you'd comment SIGGRAPH and, it wouldn't quite be what you were hoping for. It'd be like a camera tracker. And you'd be like, I need a camera tracker. And now I can't do without the camera tracker. I'm in other apps going like, where's your camera tracker? Why don't you have a camera tracker?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's a little frustrating to me. Well, I guess there's two ends because like obviously there's other softwares. Cinema is competing with other software packages. So if somebody else has functionality that is just core to your workflow and Cinema doesn't have it, then I can see why people are like, I really want that. And something like UVs, like, it took a while, but now we've started getting some really robust UVs. And for a long time, people really wanted that. So I can understand that frustration, but it's always a little depressing to me when you go into a random YouTube video, or it's like Maxon does the big announcement, they're doing a live stream, and every single person in that stream has a pet project, a pet implementation that they want. They're like, I want this thing, and they're not going to be happy if they don't have that one thing. But there's 5 other people who have their one little thing that they want, and it's like, do you know how long it takes to implement this stuff? It's insane. And there's so many systems. They have to make sure that everything is compatible with everything else. I mean, it took like Recall, our new plugin Recall, is 9,000 lines of code by itself just to make sure that it's compatible with everything and can pull things from one scene to another. Like every time something's implemented, there is so much more work to make sure it implements into everything. And everybody's like, it doesn't have this one thing. This version sucks. It's like, okay, you are utterly lacking.
It doesn't have aces, and I don't know what aces are, but someone told me that aces are the only way to make renders look good. And if you don't have aces, then this is terrible.
Yeah. No, I'm there with you. I mean, it goes to like, no, let your voice be known. Like, it goes to like, oh, I wish that this would have this in the future. It's like super cool. But then whenever it's like, oh, it doesn't have this thing, like rage. It's like, do you know how much work was like added in here, and how many features were added that other people are like, this is what I needed, this is what I wanted. Like we now have the ability to do these other things that you would never think of. And
They also underwent, like, I mean, getting to this state of this release of a tech preview is on the back of, you know, Dave coming in. It's on the back of Redshift being acquired. It's on the back of a merger with Red Giant, who I don't even think we've scratched the surface on what is going to happen with that. The Red Giant Magic Bullet Looks integration into the viewport and to the picture viewer, like the second they announced that whole like pairing, I was like, oh my God, please turn the picture viewer into a mini compositor. Like, turn the mini viewer into that Magic Bullet plugin, FX comps or something like that, whatever it is. Like, if the picture viewer was had like a nice like comp thing, like that was just set up and ready to go, I'd be blown away. And all this stuff happening at the same time, like this package is going to be packed with just good stuff.
And this was a half-year release. We had another version like less than 6 months ago. I
was happy with 22. The metal performance on my laptop, like my MacBook Pro, because I'm still a Mac user on my laptop land, it made Space Cinema, like which I use for the real-time stuff that I work on with like Unity. I'll do all my modeling and setups and stuff in Cinema because it's just like it's way faster to kind of block things out, export them. And then we also have a USD importer and exporter. How did that come into pipeline so fast? Like that's it's nuts. I think that 22 and 23 have shown just leaps and bounds package improvements from the previous ones.
Oh, it's super crazy. I mean, it's always kind of been the thing for me forever that a new version of Cinema comes out and I'd learn it really quickly and then teach other people. It's been the thing I used to present at Chicago C4D, where it's like, oh, R12.5 comes out and suddenly we get all these new dynamics, and I learn it in like 3 hours and then teach everybody that night, not even knowing the version was coming out. It took me so many days to learn all of the new features of this release to any kind of reasonable level, to record a video to demo it, just because there were so many new systems, so many, like none of the stuff was like, oh, look, there's even Voronoi Fracture, like that is very quick to demo. But this time it's like, oh, look at these big giant features of like doing like the pose library stuff and the motion transfer, where it's like, whoa, I would never have thought of this implementation or that I would need it in any way. And it's like, wow, I just transferred this to my robot character with a couple of clicks. It's crazy.
Looking at the character improvements made me actually want to get back into doing character stuff, or learning it at least. Like, because of the way that you guys were explaining how to filter the objects with the selections, like the micro scripting to link the different pieces, like that was like, oh, I can do this. Like, I can do this now. Like, because before it was completely out of the question. Every time I do a rig, make it skin, shoulders up to the ears, elbows to the floor, the hips shoot out, and the thing falls over, and the creature somehow is created and manifested in the real world and then dies.
There's no audio in the scene, but he's screaming. How is that possible?
Yeah, he blames me for his creation and demise. No.
Yeah. Well, the point being is, I think this was a pretty great release. It was pretty huge, and the fact that we have this kind of bonus tech demo to start playing around with and making some crazy things and giving feedback. It shows you what the future is going to look like. And you and I didn't spend any time chatting about where we can see this being implemented. The idea of like, if this is pure speculation, no information from Maxon, but like as systems get added, like I said, this was pretty much cloner functionality, and at the very end they snuck in some basic modeling functionality. But as more parts of Cinema are integrated and those are brought in as nodes, as these start to be able to live in the object manager and interact with each other that way, as we can start exporting and sharing assets, like this is such the beginning of this. It starts boggling your mind of how these might be integrated.
And they've been saying new object manager. That's multiple times I've heard people on stream saying, until there's a new object manager, which means that like one of the like penultimate, if not biggest bottleneck that a lot of Cinema 4D users have had, based on the tag system, the object manager hierarchy, the order of operations, and the complicated nature of its relationship to the viewport, which have kind of slowed down a lot of people's productivity, maybe going away in some future release that might not be too far out. Like that's like, oh man, imagine if XRefs work now.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like
mean, I've
this,
always been thankful I don't have to use them.
but imagine if you could use XREFs.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you were working in in an environment where XREFs worked as advertised, where tag selection and material arrangement didn't cause the XREF to completely fail,
Oh,
where you had to like initialize for random seed values and stuff. Like XREFs or they always on paper felt like a very powerful system that was just not capable of being executed like accurately.
yeah. Well, I think it's one of those, if you follow all the rules, it'll behave. But as soon as you go outside those rules, it's like, oh, nope, you're screwed now. The, but yeah, I mean, it just goes to like trying to picture the future. And I mean, once again, this is pure speculation, but the idea that soon, hopefully, when you make a cube, it's actually a node cube. You don't realize it, but you're working in a node cube. And if you want to, you could right click on that and say, go into the nodes and be like, oh, I'm going to tweak I'm going to add some new settings into my base cube. I'm going to like open up something like the Voronoi fracture and be like, oh, I'm going to go inside. Here's how it does those connections. Like, let me explode that out and add new features. Like that's the dream to me, is like how granular we might be able to get inside of these different parts, because like we've got all the power of the cloner now, but right now we're gonna have to build and link everything manually. But you could imagine that you could come up with a new, right now we have grid and linear and honeycomb, but you could be like, I've got a different mode in my head, it just works this way, I want it to be there. And the idea of being able to take the cloner, explode it, be like, it's got my new mode in it, and now I've got my
Yeah.
Chris super cloner,
Yeah,
then
I have a four-dimensional parametric cube that I just created for the first time based on a white paper that I co-wrote with my brother, and now I've implemented that geometry into the cloner.
yeah, the so a lot of that starts getting really excited, and I mean, I look forward to a unified system into the future. Well, right now this is like a glimpse at what's coming.
Yeah, it's so weird to have like an active beta existing in a product like that is. It's so cool. I'm like, I was one of the people that when they announced going monthly sub, I was like, yes. Does this mean we're gonna see like updates rolling faster than yearly? And I remember Burn saying like, no one said anything about updates happening faster. It just
Yeah,
means that
well,
there's
yeah,
a monthly sub now.
yeah, and then yeah, a year later, it's like, oh, look, two versions of Cinema in 1 year.
Yeah.
We're using Cinema back in the day, when they used to do the modules, and when they
Yes.
would release a random module. It's like, hey, here's Hair, here's Sketchatune, and in like the middle of July or something. It's like, what?
I was using Cinema 4D long enough ago to have watched tutorials on how to use Jenna 4D.
Oh, there you go. That's pretty like YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. Those were like hosted videos on a forum that you could only have access to if you bought the plugin.
Yep.
Someone
Good
in the
old
stream asked about our what do we think the ecosystem looks like on the landscape in 12 months? I have no idea.
What do you mean by? What do you think they mean by ecosystem?
Like the Maxon ecosystem, like the incorporation of Redshift. I assume that's what they mean, like the whole landscape, like the Maxon world, like potential, like I don't know. In my head, with their big tie into the user base with ARM, like I don't know about 12 months, but in the next 32 months, I want to see Cinema 4D on my iPad Pro.
I'm not so sure about that, but it'd be nice to be able to have another little monitor or have it do something.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
it's no way to tell.
yeah, we can't possibly know. I mean, we could talk about the things that we'd like to see, but even right now, like while Maxon and Redshift are, like Maxon purchased Redshift, I know that they get to run fairly autonomously, and that they Redshift works in more software than just Cinema. Now, as far as where the user base is at, I mean, it would be amazing if it's just if Redshift was like the core kind of default Cinema renderer, I'd be super duper happy, as long as everything was fully integrated and everything worked. We're just almost in the era that anybody who's doing professional work isn't going to be spending probably that much time in the physical renderer anymore. It's just going to be third party rendering out of the gate. So that's, and you can even see that like they're putting their focus on making sure that the viewport looks better. There's no updates to the physical renderer. So that being integrated, I think, is just something that every version that comes out, people are like, is it integrated? Oh, it's a separate purchase. Is it integrated? Separate purchase. So obviously that's what the users want, but of course that's going to come with a bigger sticker price. So you got to
But
keep that in mind.
Autodesk, I don't think. Well, no, do they? I have no idea. I assume Arnold is kind of like costly rolled into the price of the Maya seat. Like it's free with the seat, but the cost has been adjusted. I have no idea what their pricing is like.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
I've used Maya for like 45 minutes total.
I did a semester of animation mentor in Maya, just doing character animation, and then I was like, I'm going to go build my own rigs in cinema and continue
I
the second half that way.
I'm working more and more in the real time space lately. Like this company that I'm working with primarily right now, they are an application company that's creating a really fun and playful interactive way to learn how to create music. And I'm doing a lot of visualizations and stuff for their product. And one thing that I would just love is a tighter, easier handshake with cinema and game engines. Like I feel like if anyone can really nail like the transitionary gaps between real-time user and offline user, it could be Maxon, because they've always sort of had their feet in that realm. But in order to do that, I think they're already doing it with the USD importer exporter and Redshift shifting to having USD support. If you can open a Cinema 4D file in Unity and all your materials work out the gate because they've ported over to like a standard surface model that works in the viewport the same way that it works in Redshift, the same way that it works in a USD export to Katana or Houdini or Unreal or Unity, I think that will be amazing. That's kind of that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and Rick just mentioned in the chat, and I was actually going to mention it anyway, that Maxon just got one of the Unreal Engine mega grants.
Yeah, I saw that.
So they are, you can expect some way tighter integration with Unreal. And I think that's another brilliant way. Jonathan Windbrushes, all of his work over there. I mean, a lot of, actually, I saw a pretty good tweet the other day, but it's like, there's a perception that like real time just means like, oh, everything is instant. It's like, no, you do a lot of preparation and work to make sure it can work in real time.
It takes a long time. It takes a long time to get to the real time thing. But I'm not talking about advertising. Like my personal work and business and my invoices are going to start getting paid by the real time industry because they need more artists.
Yeah. No, and I'm totally with you. But it just goes to, because Unreal has that like one of their recent like showpieces where it's like that hovercraft. It looks very Blade Runner. It's like zipping through this rocky terrain in the fog. But I've watched like their behind the scenes making that, and it's like to do this scene, it is in real time, but like they baked everything down. Like there is nothing that exists behind the camera. It's like what you see is what exists, and everything else there's nothing. And here's how they fake the fog, and here's how they fake the sky, and here's that. It's like, okay, this is not like you're just creating unlimited geometry and saying magically GI light everything and it just works. There's a lot of work to be done there. But in any case, the closer we can get to like a really tight handshake between Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine, to like the more that the viewport looks like what our final render is going to be, like, and you know, even if it's not real time, if it's running 1/30th real time, it's still going to render out a frame per second type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally fine.
Which is, I'm happy with that. No, that's totally great. I think it's so a lot of those things, those setups to get things working in Unreal or in real time, and forget about the package, because if Apple and Unreal don't stop fighting, I don't think cinema users will be talking too much about working with Unreal since they have such a market share of Mac users. If the Unreal Engine's gone from one of their biggest markets, then oops. But back in the day, when we all worked on G4 Power Macs in After Effects 6.5, you had to do that same type of prep work for all your assets to fake the fog and fake the clouds and fake, you had to piece things together like with hope and good times. Like it was not easy to get a final image out.
People, I don't know. Do you know anything about Redshift's real time anything? Because I do not.
I've just seen the tech demos that we've seen like maybe 3 minutes of over the last like year or so. I don't know. I hope that I wish Redshift everything positive. I want them to succeed very well. I want that to become Maxon's new core render engine and have it be like integrated in there and feel real tight for Maxon's family. But I'm so kind of like salty on paying 2 years of maintenance for features that just aren't getting delivered.
I just don't render that often, but yeah. And I mean, essentially I went straight from physical to Redshift, so it's going to be brilliant. I know a lot of people it still feels like it hasn't changed a lot in the last couple of years, but a lot of really big, super professional studios are using Redshift and Arnold. A lot of people
Yeah.
will swear by Arnold. And then a lot of the smaller houses or individuals, especially like a daily render type crowd, the hobbyists, are all about the Octane because of that instant feedback. Somebody was telling me in the chat, if anybody knows, but it was always a thing that in Octane it was really dangerous because you could do daily renders and they're going to look gorgeous and they're going to come out so fast. But then when it came time to deliver production, you'd always kind of hit like this RAM limit, and then Redshift or Octane would just be like, nope, not going to do it. Somebody was recently saying like, oh no, something significant has changed by that, and I want to, if it did, I
It
want to know
has.
so I don't.
It has dramatically since 4 in 2018, 2020 and 2019 specifically, those versions.
Mhm.
There's still gotchas where you will get stuck in a project because it's rendering and there's something going on, but they have really great customer support, just like Maxon does, and they're really active with the community. So if you have a bug, you can usually get it on one of the Slacks that are available in the community, and someone from those teams will snatch it up and look at it. It's gotten a lot more stable over the years, but that used to entirely be the thing. You would get boards from an artist, and they'd be like, "Oh, this is great. How long was the render?" It's like 8 minutes a frame, and then you have absolutely nowhere to turn to find render power to get that done.
Yeah.
You had very minimal results, but with like the advent of render, GPUs getting better and better. I remember SIGGRAPH 2011 just raving about GPU engines. I was just like, we gotta get on GPU. We need GPU. Like I remember me and Nick and someone else running around that hotel in Anaheim just yelling
Yeah.
GPU, and everyone was like, you'll never get a complex scene rendered on the GPU. And to see where we are now,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Changed so much. And somebody's asking if you have a stack of GPUs behind you.
Oh, yeah. There's 8 boxes for my 2080 Ti's. I'm eBaying them off right now and preparing to pare down to just two 3090s. I think for a while. I really don't do a lot of rendering anymore, so I just kind of want to play Cyberpunk 2077 in like
Oh,
in like 4K at 120 frames per section, and have just really fast local style frames because I'm really only rendering style frames in like clips of 15 frames.
that's cool. I'm also waiting for Cyberpunk. That's the one thing I'm kind of cautiously optimistic for.
Yes. Just two 3090s. The return on investment of the 8 2080 Ti's will cover that very easily.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, I think that should do it. Thanks for coming on the stream, man. We got to do this again.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm sorry that it's taken so long for me to reach out and hop on. Congratulations on your most recent plugin. I really want to play with it. It's the caching system that I've wanted inside of Cinema for a long time. And congrats on Rocket Lasso. It's been looking great, man.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we'll definitely have Casey on again in the future. I'm not sure when the next stream is scheduled. We already kind of had the season finale. These have all been sort of bonus. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for hanging out, man, and tackling some node questions. I look forward to learning a lot more. I'm sure you're going to be getting nice and deep in it. And
Oh
in the
yeah.
meantime, if you guys like the work that I'm doing, if you like these live streams, if you like the tutorials I do, everything is supported by the tools we make. Rocket Lasso does not take on client work. So if you want the support, then the best ways are through Patreon or by buying yourself a tool that not only is going to help support Rocket Lasso, but it's going to speed up your workflow. And I think Recall is awesome. So I will end with a little commercial here for Recall, and I'll see everybody in the next live stream. Thanks again, Casey. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Yeah. Thanks.